Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world of candlelight, cold stone corridors, and the surprisingly complicated childhood of a future queen who had no idea she'd spend half her life arguing with a king. You're standing there, well, more like gently wobbling there because it's late, at the edge of a warm Spanish courtyard. Orange trees glowing under twilight. And you can almost smell the dust rising as young Catherine of Aragon is being shaped into someone you honestly couldn't keep up with. Seriously, you'd tap out after the first day of her schedule. The girl studied Latin before breakfast. You'd never survive. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, go ahead and comment where you're listening from, your city, your time zone, maybe even whether you're wrapped in a blanket or hiding under your sheets like a medieval ghost. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You breathe in, letting the courtyard fade. And the first thing you sense is motion, gentle, rhythmic, the way a horse sways when you're small enough to feel every step. You're traveling alongside Catherine long before she's Catherine the Queen. She's just Catalina, the youngest daughter of two monarchs who seem allergic to rest. Her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, built their world on wars, treaties, and endless administrative paperwork that could make even your inbox look merciful. You watch little Catalina walk between their thrones, absorbing the atmosphere like a sponge, so determined it might actually intimidate the furniture. You feel the heat of Spain around you, thick enough to melt your medieval sandals. And Catalina's childhood unfolds like a series of carefully orchestrated lessons. Languages, theology, diplomacy, embroidery, because apparently being a princess required you to negotiate international alliances and stitch flowers without poking yourself. Catalina excelled at both. If she weren't a future queen, she'd absolutely run a terrifyingly efficient Etsy shop. What most people forget is that Catalina wasn't raised gently, she was forged. Her parents had just united Spain, completed a long, brutal conflict, and established a kingdom that needed heirs who were both durable and politically useful. You watch her learning how to pray with intense concentration. The kind that makes you feel guilty for every time you've zoned out mid-sentence. She was trained to endure hardship with the same calm you use when you pretend your phone is on silent, but actually it just died. And amid all this training, there's a strange, almost cinematic awareness settling over you. One day, she will leave this bright, hot world behind and sail into the fog-thick island of England. But right now, she's still just a girl in a courtyard, listening to the echoes of royal ambitions bouncing off stone. One popular historical event unfolds right in front of you: her betrothal to Prince Arthur of England. It's arranged when she's practically still collecting childhood memories and maybe the medieval equivalent of stickers. That alliance between Spain and England was a big deal. Like, shift the balance of European politics, big. People celebrated, diplomats toasted, and Catalina continued her lessons. Because duty waited for no one, not even a kid with braids. You watch her practicing dance steps meant for royal courts she hasn't yet seen. Her tutor corrects her posture, reminding her that one day she'd have to stand beside a prince. She nods with that steady, serene expression that would later terrify Henry VIII's lawyers. Here's the strange fact rarely mentioned. Catalina was raised not just with discipline but with a kind of battlefield awareness. Her mother, Queen Isabella, occasionally took her daughters to war camps, not close enough to swords, but close enough to understand the weight of crowns. There's a moment when you sense Catalina watching soldiers pack armor, maybe absorbing concepts like loyalty and strategy the same way modern kids absorb TikTok dances. It's subtle but strong. She's learning that leadership isn't decorative, it's exhausting. And, as always, historians still debate whether Catalina carried the emotional intensity of these early lessons into adulthood or whether she used them as armor when life in England turned messy later on. Some say she was shaped by duty. Others say she wielded duty like a sword. But you'll get there in time. Right now, you glance down a long hallway of her childhood palace. Sunlight turning the columns gold. The air is warm, but you catch the distant sound of murmuring advisors discussing treaties. Catalina pauses, listening with curiosity far beyond her age. You almost want to tell her to enjoy being a kid while she can. But she's already miles ahead of you. On some mornings, she practices archery. On others, she memorizes passages from religious texts that would make your eyelids droop in 3 seconds. And then there's the diplomatic etiquette training, like learning which royal gets which chair, which envoy gets which greeting, and how not to insult entire kingdoms by accident. Honestly, you'd probably slip up within 5 minutes and trigger a minor international incident. She grows into a young woman whose confidence doesn't come from being praised but from surviving impossible expectations. Her tutors remark on her sharp mind. Her ladies-in-waiting whisper about her kindness. And the palace staff quietly note that she never complains. Even during the famously intense winters in Castile, she just tucks her shawl tighter and keeps going. As the years move forward, you sense the subtle shift toward destiny. The betrothal with Arthur becomes more than words on parchment. Envoys travel back and forth. Portraits are exchanged. Well, something like portraits. Let's just say the art wasn't winning awards for accuracy. Catalina's is painted carefully, the artist smoothing out imperfections the same way filters do today. When the English court sees it, they nod approvingly. When Catalina sees Arthur's likeness, she probably wonders why he looks 25 even though he's not. Medieval art was basically the original catfish. But beneath all this preparation, you feel something else in her story: excitement. Not fear, not dread, actual anticipation. For all her training, Catalina dreamed of making her own mark in England. She believed in the alliance, the marriage, the future she'd been promised since childhood. And you, walking beside her in the palace garden as dusk settles over the tiles. Feel the tension between what she expects and what history will eventually hand her. For now, though, the air is lavender-scented and still, and Catalina stands at the beginning of a path she believes she understands. You are the only one who knows how winding it will become. You exhale, letting the shadows stretch a little longer, and the night folds softly around you, carrying you forward toward the next chapter of her fate. You're still drifting in that warm twilight of Spain when the world around you begins to shift. The orange trees dissolve into mist. The heat fades, and suddenly the air tastes different, colder, wetter, tinged with the metallic scent of a country that seems permanently confused about whether it's raining or just thinking about raining. You blink, and the gentle thud beneath your feet becomes the roll of a ship's deck. Catherine, now a young woman, no longer the little Catalina, stands beside you, staring into waves that look as if they're deciding whether to swallow the entire vessel out of spite. You brace yourself against the railing. Feeling it slick with sea spray, you almost slip. Because you're built for soft mattresses and carpeted hallways. Not medieval voyages. Catherine, meanwhile, stays perfectly poised. She's been trained for this crossing her entire life. Even though her seasickness probably didn't get the memo. You can see the determination in her eyes, something fierce and sparkling. Like she's facing destiny with the quiet stubbornness of someone who absolutely refuses to be defeated by the weather. The ship groans under the weight of trunks filled with gowns, jewels, letters, and diplomatic expectations that would crush your average mortal. England awaits, but it's not exactly rolling out the red carpet. Fog hangs over the horizon like a curtain slowly lowering. A sailor murmurs a prayer under his breath. Catherine pretends she didn't hear him. You hear the whisper anyway. Carried by the wind. May God help us reach port. The English Channel has that reputation, temperamental, dramatic, kind of like a reality show contestant who's been given too much screen time. When the ship finally reaches England, you get your first blast of truly British weather. It's like the sky sneezes on you, cold, persistent, and just rude enough to remind you that you're very far from Spain now. Catherine steps onto English soil for the first time, and you swear the fog shifts as if trying to get a better look at her. Her ladies-in-waiting cling to their cloaks, shivering, while Catherine holds herself upright, as if the drizzle can't touch her because she simply refuses to acknowledge its existence. The welcoming ceremonies begin, but ceremony is a generous word. There are trumpets, slightly off-key. Nobles bow, some a bit too dramatically. Probably hoping to impress the Spanish princess. Horses fidget. Officials recite speeches written by someone who clearly owned too many quills and not enough restraint. You watch Catherine smile and nod through it all. Her face composed in a way that decades later would drive Henry VIII to furious bewilderment. She has mastered the art of regal patience, the kind that says, "Yes, this is long and dull, but I will outlast it." A fascinating tidbit slips into your awareness as you walk beside her. Historians still debate how much Catherine truly understood about the court she was walking into. Was she prepared for the political labyrinth of Tudor England? Or did she underestimate the complexity of the shifting alliances surrounding her future husband? Some argue she was prepared for everything except the pace and pettiness of English politics. Others claim she stepped onto English soil with her eyes wide open. You don't know yet, but you feel the weight of those unanswered questions pressing gently against your thoughts. As the procession carries on, you catch glimpses of ordinary English faces peering from behind windows, their breaths fogging the glass. To them, she is a symbol, a foreign princess bringing wealth, alliance, and the promise of stability. A few children wave tiny hands. Nervously excited, Catherine smiles at them, and suddenly the cold air softens just a little. You realize this is one of her gifts. She can make strangers feel seen without saying a word. And then comes the first truly unforgettable moment, the meeting with Prince Arthur. He is pale, so pale you briefly wonder if the English sun is a myth, but he stands tall. Dressed in rich fabric that contrasts sharply with his translucent complexion. Catherine curtsies with exquisite grace. Arthur bows a bit too quickly. As if he's rehearsed this but still isn't sure he's doing it right. You can almost hear his thoughts scrambling, like a student who skimmed the textbook chapter 10 minutes before class. Catherine's expression remains calm, but you can feel her thoughts humming. This is the person I've been tied to since childhood. She looks at him with curiosity. Not disappointment, not yet. Arthur speaks to her in carefully practiced Spanish, and she answers with a warmth that even the damp air can't smother. For a small moment, the entire gathering relaxes. Maybe this will work. Maybe the alliance will hold. Maybe the prince and princess will grow into something strong together. But as you walk with them through the gray-stoned halls of Ludlow Castle, you sense something else lingering around Arthur: fragility. His steps are measured, his breaths shallow. Catherine notices it too, though she hides her concern behind gentle conversation. You feel a faint pang in your chest as you watch them settle into their new roles. The marriage ceremonies are elaborate. You taste the waxy scent of candles warmed by crowded bodies. You see embroidered banners fluttering like overexcited birds. You hear lords murmuring theories about the future. Catherine glows with youthful dignity, determined to fulfill the destiny laid before her. You admire her composure so much that part of you wants to borrow even a teaspoon of it for your everyday life. Here's a lesser-known fact slipping into your ear. Many at court whispered about Catherine's dowry, specifically. How large it was and how late some of it would be. Diplomatic finances were messy, and those tangled numbers would echo through her entire future in England. Catherine probably didn't know then just how many times officials would use her unpaid dowry as an excuse to leave her in limbo later. But for now, everything feels hopeful. Nights at Ludlow are cold. The castle stones breathe chill into your bones. Catherine wraps herself in thick blankets, trying not to show discomfort. You can almost see her longing for the warmth of Spain. But she keeps her voice steady, her shoulders square. She must believe this new life will grow kinder in time. As days pass, the couple settles into a gentle routine. Catherine writes letters home, her script precise and elegant despite the cold nibbling at her fingers. Arthur reads beside her, coughing softly into his sleeve. You watch Catherine glance at him with concern she tries to hide from the servants. There's something tender in the way she places a hand on his arm when he falters. Her composure steady, her patience unshaken. And yet, as you walk the corridors with them, shadows cling to the corners. Arthur's health wavers, the winter grows harsher. The castle drafts slip through cracks like mischievous ghosts. Servants whisper behind tapestries. Some say Arthur works too hard. Others say the climate is crushing him. A few mutter about destiny. You feel the tension rising like a tide beneath your feet. Something is shifting, something uncertain, something Catherine cannot yet name. But for now, she continues forward, unaware that the journey she began in fog will soon lead her into a storm far colder than England's winter. The days at Ludlow Castle grow heavier. And you feel it the way you feel a storm rolling in, quiet at first, then pressing against your skin like a warning. The stone corridors feel colder than they should for early winter. and the candles flicker with a nervousness that seems almost sentient. You walk beside Catherine as she moves through these drafty hallways. Her footsteps soft but purposeful, and you can sense the shift long before anyone dares to speak it aloud. Arthur is fading. It begins subtly. A cough here, a tremor in his hands there. At first, Catherine brushes it aside. She's newly married, hopeful, determined to see only the best in the life she's been given. But you feel the hesitation in her breath when Arthur's steps falter, or when he grips the edge of a chair a moment too long. The servants murmur when they think no one is listening. Some say it's the cold. Others claim it's a lingering fever. One particularly dramatic maid insists Ludlow is cursed, which, given the drafts, doesn't seem entirely impossible. You notice Catherine watching Arthur during meals. Her posture refined, her expression gentle, but her eyes sharp with worry. She grew up in the court of warrior monarchs. Illness isn't something she fears, but it's something she studies. Yet with all her training, all her resilience, nothing in her childhood prepared her for the slow unraveling of a marriage she had barely begun to live. Arthur tries to be cheery. Bless him, he jokes during lessons, tries to show Catherine the gardens, even attempts a short ride one morning. But by midday, he's pale as the fog outside the castle walls. You watch Catherine steady him as they return, her arm discreet but firm around his. And then comes the night everything changes, though you don't realize it until later. The castle goes quiet early. The fire crackles in Catherine's chamber. You can hear the wind dragging itself along the battlements, muttering something unintelligible and cold. A knock comes at her door, soft but urgent. Catherine rises immediately. The physician's face says everything. You follow her as she strides, faster than you've ever seen her move, through corridors that echo with her heartbeat. When she reaches Arthur's chamber, she pauses, only for a breath, but you feel the world tilt. Inside, Arthur is slumped against pillows, his breath shallow, his skin damp. Catherine crosses the room with a calmness she absolutely does not feel and takes his hand. His fingers are barely warm. You watch her lean in, whispering something soft, likely in Spanish, the language of comfort she hasn't spoken much since arriving in England. There's a moment when Arthur opens his eyes. He sees her, really sees her, and in that fragile gaze, there's an entire lifetime that will never happen, never lived, never built, never shared. You inhale sharply without meaning to. The next days blur. Arthur worsens. Physicians prescribe the medieval equivalent of hope for the best, which involves hot cloths, herbs, and something that smells suspiciously like regret. Catherine remains by him, steady as a stone pillar. She prays, reads to him, sits in silence with him. You watch her fingers trace circles on the back of his hand, a gesture so gentle it almost hurts to witness. And then, one cold morning, the castle bell tolls. You feel the sound before you hear it, like a ripple traveling down your spine. Servants freeze. Catherine stops moving entirely for a moment, as if suspended in time. Then she exhales, and that single breath carries the weight of a future she didn't choose. Prince Arthur is dead. You try to swallow the sudden tightness in your throat, but it stays there, stubborn as the sorrow settling over Ludlow. Catherine doesn't cry immediately. She sits by Arthur's now still form, her face pale but composed. The way someone looks when reality hasn't quite fully landed. Only later, in the privacy of her chamber, do her shoulders fold inward. Her hands trembling just enough for you to see the grief she refuses to voice. What follows is a strange, suspended state of existence. Catherine is still technically Princess of Wales, but without a prince. Her marriage lasted only a few months. She is young, alone, in a foreign kingdom where every plan built for her future has suddenly collapsed. And here's a truth few talk about. Arthur's death didn't only shatter Catherine emotionally, it threw her entire political identity into chaos. Her position, her finances, her status, all instantly became complicated. So complicated, in fact, that even the most diligent Tudor administrator would probably need a very large drink and a nap. As Catherine mourns, ambassadors begin circling like cautious birds. Letters fly between courts. Spain wants assurances. England wants money. Catherine just wants the world to stop spinning long enough to understand what she's supposed to do next. You walk with her during those quiet days. Along the same courtyard where she once held Arthur's arm. The winter air bites at her cheeks. She pulls her cloak tighter. A lady-in-waiting whispers that perhaps she will return home. Catherine says nothing. A lesser-known detail floats into your awareness. Catherine caught the same illness Arthur had, but survived. Some accounts even suggest that for a while, she was close to death herself. It's a fact that sits uneasily in your mind, how fragile fate can be. How thin the line between future queen and forgotten widow. And yet, even in grief, there's a steady fire beneath her calm. You feel it when she stands at Arthur's funeral. Her posture unbreakable, her silence powerful. You sense it when she writes to her parents, telling them of his kindness, his gentle nature, his final days. There's no dramatics in her words, just truth, tempered with grace. Historians still debate what Catherine was thinking in the days following Arthur's death. Did she believe God was testing her faith? Did she fear being cast aside? Did she trust that another path would open? The arguments go in circles, and you can almost hear scholars centuries later whispering across time, each convinced they know her inner heart. You smile faintly. Catherine would probably find their certainty amusing. In the meantime, England shifts around her. King Henry VII sends for her. She is moved to different lodgings. Like a piece on a chessboard no one wants to forfeit. The dowry negotiations restart, painfully slow. Catherine's allowance is cut, leaving her household struggling. Some days, she cannot even afford the candles needed to read her prayer books. But here, you see the first spark of the woman she will become. The Catherine who will kneel before Henry VIII's court. The Catherine who will stand against political pressure. The Catherine who will refuse to be dismissed. It begins quietly. In the way she speaks gently to her ladies, ensuring they feel safe. In how she writes home, not begging, but asserting her dignity. In how she walks through cold English hallways as if they are corridors of a palace that one day will belong to her. Her grief softens, but her resolve sharpens. You walk beside her as twilight settles on the castle grounds. The sky a blend of gray and fading blue. Catherine pauses at the window, gazing out at a world she still doesn't fully understand. She is 19, widowed, politically stranded, and yet you feel something forming within her, steady and bright. This is not the end of her story. It's only the beginning of the long, unyielding battle she never asked for, but one she will face with a quiet strength that England will remember long after the cold winds of Ludlow stop whispering her name. The weeks after Arthur's death feel stretched thin, like parchment pulled too tight. You move through the lingering silence of Ludlow Castle with Catherine, and at some point you realize that the quiet isn't peaceful anymore, it's hollow. Even the servants walk more softly, their footsteps muffled as if they're afraid to disturb something fragile. Catherine spends her mornings in prayer, her hands folded, her voice steady, though you can sense the exhaustion tucked beneath her calm. She prays not only for Arthur's soul but for clarity, for direction, for some kind of path forward in a kingdom that now doesn't quite know what to do with her. Her status has shifted overnight. She is no longer the Princess of Wales in any functional sense. Though no one dares to say the words out loud, you follow her down the corridor as she's escorted away from Ludlow. Her trunks loaded with the remnants of a marriage that barely began. Outside, the weather is merciless. The wind whips her veil as she steps into the carriage, and you climb in after her, feeling the cold seep into your bones despite the thick blankets. Catherine sits with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the horizon. She does not weep, not here, not now. She waits. London welcomes her with a kind of forced politeness. She's brought to the royal residences, but not as a cherished daughter-in-law, more like a foreign guest who overstayed her invitation, but no one wants to be rude about it. You can almost feel the tension simmering under the surface, like a pot someone forgot on low heat. The courtiers bow, smile, and whisper behind sleeves the moment she turns away. The word, widow, clings to her, heavy and premature. King Henry VII receives her with cool courtesy. You stand beside her, sensing how carefully she measures her responses. He is stern, calculating, and every glance he gives Catherine feels like an assessment of her value, her usefulness, her future bargaining potential. She is no longer a future queen, she is a financial negotiation wrapped in silk. And the king isn't subtle about it. It becomes painfully clear that her dowry, the enormous sum promised by her parents, hasn't been fully paid. Half the English court seems to know this may become a problem, and the other half already considers it a disaster. Catherine's financial situation rapidly deteriorates. Within months, her allowance is reduced to crumbs. Her servants go unpaid. She cannot afford proper clothing or new candles. You watch her ladies-in-waiting huddle around the hearth at night, whispering anxiously. Catherine listens, quietly, her face illuminated by the fading firelight. Her pride refuses to let her ask for help, so she does something far harder, she endures. You watch her walk through palace halls as though they belong to her, even while she's technically living on borrowed generosity. She writes to her parents, explaining her circumstances with dignified restraint. Ferdinand responds with vague promises. Isabella, ever the warrior queen, writes more forcefully, but money still doesn't arrive. You can almost feel Catherine folding those letters with tight fingers. She is caught between two worlds, neither willing to take responsibility for her well-being. And here's a strange fact most people overlook. During this period of uncertainty, Catherine's household went without meat for weeks at a time. Even the servants grew thin. Her ladies would sew their gowns repeatedly, patching holes with scraps that didn't match. Catherine herself wore the same handful of dresses, their hems frayed from constant use. And yet, she maintained the grace of someone who could pretend her world wasn't collapsing beneath her feet. Historians still debate whether King Henry VII was intentionally trying to pressure Spain or simply being frugal to the point of cruelty. Some say he genuinely didn't know how desperate Catherine's situation was. Others argue he knew every detail and used her hardship as leverage. You can practically hear medieval scholars whispering across centuries, each convinced of their theory, but none can say for certain. One bitter winter morning, you follow Catherine into a cold, dark chapel. Frost clings to the windows, and the air bites with a kind of sharpness that feels personal. She kneels before the altar, her breath forming soft clouds. She prays quietly, words almost merging with the whisper of wind slipping through cracks in the stone. You kneel beside her, not because you're required, but because the sincerity in her voice draws you in. She is not praying for comfort. She is praying for strength. Days blur into one another. A repetitive loop of waiting, hoping, negotiating, enduring. Court life moves on around her. Balls are held. Diplomatic dinners take place. Gossip swirls like a cyclone. Catherine becomes something of a ghost, present, but not included. Young Henry, Arthur's younger brother, passes her in corridors sometimes. He's tall, energetic, bright-eyed, barely into adolescence. He always bows to her with polite respect, though now and then you catch a boyish curiosity in his glance. Catherine responds with kindness, unaware that this boy will one day shape the entirety of her destiny. As you watch her navigate this limbo, the emotional weight of it settles deeper into your chest. Catherine is 20 now, young, intelligent, devout, and completely trapped. She cannot return to Spain without humiliation. She cannot move forward in England without money. She cannot remarry because no one knows what her future holds. She exists in a strange, suspended state, a political pawn whose next move depends entirely on forces she cannot control. And yet, this is where her character begins to crystallize. You see it in her refusal to dismiss her servants despite lacking funds. In how she writes to the Spanish ambassador with measured clarity. In how she holds her head high during court ceremonies, even when her gown is visibly worn. In how she keeps her voice steady during prayers, even when her stomach growls from lack of food. A new resilience forms around her grief, something quiet but unmistakably strong. Late one evening, you find her standing by a frost-covered window, the moonlight soft against her face. She looks far older than her years, not in a defeated way, but in that strange way people look when life has pressed them hard but hasn't managed to break them. She whispers something you can barely hear, a promise, perhaps, or a prayer, or maybe just her own name said softly to remind herself she still exists. Then she turns, adjusts her worn shawl, and walks forward with a calm that feels almost defiant. And as you follow her into the dim hallway, you realize this moment, this quiet perseverance, is the foundation of everything she will become. The Catherine who will weather future storms. The Catherine who will challenge a king. The Catherine who will refuse to surrender when the world demands she kneel. This is not a queen yet. but it is the unmistakable beginning of one. The cold of England settles into your bones before you even realize it. The kind of creeping chill that feels personal. Like the weather itself is offended by your warm memories of Spain. You walk beside Catherine through the palace corridors, now familiar to you in their drafts and dim candlelight. When something begins to shift, it's not dramatic at first, just a glance, a pause, a slightly longer greeting, but you feel it even before Catherine does. Young Henry, Arthur's younger brother, has started noticing her. He's 15 now, tall for his age, shoulders broadening with the promise of the man he will one day become. His presence carries an energy that crackles through the air, lively and uncontained, the kind of enthusiasm that would exhaust you in 5 minutes. When he walks, servants straighten almost instinctively. When he laughs, courtiers glance over, hoping to be included. He is charming, restless, and just a little too aware of how charming he is. And every time his gaze drifts toward Catherine, you feel a subtle tightening in the world around you, like the universe is quietly adjusting its weight. You stand beside her one morning as she walks through the palace gardens, frost still clinging to the last stubborn leaves. When Henry approaches, his steps are confident, light, almost boyish. He greets Catherine with a bow that's technically perfect but delivered with a spark that suggests he spent extra time practicing it in his head. Catherine, ever composed, curtsies with gentle grace. Her expression remains calm, polite, warm, but you can sense a thin thread of awareness beneath the surface. This is the king's only surviving son, the future of England, and he is looking at her with something more than familial courtesy. He asks about her health, her comfort, her books. He asks if she has walked in the gardens yet, if she has seen the king's new hunting hounds, if she needs anything that the household has not provided. Catherine answers with diplomacy precise enough to be taught in classrooms. Her tone polite but never flirtatious. She keeps the boundary firm, though she doesn't step back physically. That is Catherine's way. She establishes distance not with space, but with dignity. The courtiers notice. Oh, they notice immediately. You hear whispers from the shadows, fluttering like moth wings against stone. Perhaps the young prince admires her too much. Perhaps Spain and England may still unite. Perhaps fate is not finished with her after all. But you also sense the danger of those whispers. They're delicate, volatile, the kind that could turn into rumors with razor edges. Catherine does not encourage them. She moves carefully, like someone crossing thin ice, not out of fear, but out of deep understanding of what lies beneath. She knows she is still in limbo. She knows Henry's attention is both blessing and threat. And yet, there is a genuine kindness in Henry's glance, a softness that surprises you. His youth hasn't yet hardened into kingship. There is no calculated agenda in his questions. Sometimes he simply looks at her as if she is the only source of sunlight in the pale English winter. One crisp afternoon, you find yourself walking near the training yards where Henry practices with his tutors. He's laughing as he swings a practice sword, confident and theatrical, as if trying to impress an audience that isn't there. But then he sees Catherine approaching. Instantly, he straightens, motions the tutor aside, and walks toward her with a sudden gravitas that is clearly borrowed from every knightly poem he has ever read. Catherine nods to him, serene and composed, and you swear the boy glows. He starts talking, rapidly, enthusiastically, about chivalry, tournaments, history, theology. Subjects he barely focuses on in lessons suddenly spill from him with surprising fluency. Catherine listens with patience, even amusement, offering thoughtful responses that encourage his enthusiasm while gently steering him away from rambling. And then comes one of those small, strange facts that rarely gets mentioned. Henry began sending Catherine small gifts during this period. Nothing extravagant, nothing inappropriate, just thoughtful tokens. A book he thought she might enjoy. A pair of gloves embroidered by one of the Queen Dowager's ladies. A small piece of jewelry that once belonged to a Tudor he admired. He never presented them directly. They arrived quietly, anonymously, but Catherine knew. Of course she knew. When she receives one such gift, a beautifully bound copy of a devotional text, she touches the cover lightly. Her expression impossible to read, but you sense something gentle in her chest. Not romantic, not hopeful, just appreciative. This attention, however innocent, is the first kindness she has received from the royal family in months. Still, the uncertainty of her future looms like a shadow behind every interaction. You feel it especially sharply during formal audiences with Henry VII. The king observes Catherine and his son with the calculating patience of someone evaluating multiple chess moves in advance. Sometimes he seems encouraged by their natural connection. Other times he's distant, cool, almost suspicious. His moods shift like the English weather, unpredictable and inconvenient. Historians still argue about what King Henry VII truly intended during this time. Did he imagine the possibility of Catherine eventually marrying young Henry? Or was he simply keeping all options open, preserving her as a diplomatic tool while waiting to see what Spain would do? Some scholars insist the king saw Catherine as a burden, too expensive, too uncertain. Others believe he always had a long-term plan involving her. But the truth, as always, slips somewhere through the cracks. Meanwhile, Catherine's financial struggles intensify. There are nights when her household goes without heating. You watch her read by a single candle, its flame trembling every time a draft slips under the door. Her ladies still sew in the evenings, repairing gowns that are beginning to show visible wear. Yet Catherine holds her head high in public, her posture impeccable, her dignity unshaken. It's during one of those dim, cold evenings that Henry seeks her out again. He arrives unexpectedly, his face flushed from the cold, his cloak dusted with frost. Catherine stands as he enters, offering the formal greeting due to a prince. Henry waves it off, still respectfully, but with a youthful eagerness that pushes past protocol. He asks how she is. Really asks. Not the polite version, the real question behind the question. And Catherine, tired, hungry, homesick, uncertain of her place in the world, answers with the truth softened only by grace, that she is managing. That God gives her strength. That she remains hopeful for the future. She does not complain. She does not blame, she simply speaks with calm resilience. Henry listens with a seriousness that doesn't quite fit his young face. For a moment, you see the man he might become. Compassionate, protective, warm. He promises, quietly, that things will get better. It's not a royal decree. It's not a plan. It's just a boy's sincere wish spoken aloud. And yet, For the first time in a very long while, Catherine's expression softens, not with hope. Exactly, but with a faint sense of relief. As if someone finally stepped into the silence beside her. You leave the room with her. The air warmer around you despite the winter outside. Aware that this small moment, this gentle shift, will soon blossom into a connection that neither of them fully understands yet. The charm of young Henry has begun smoothing the edges of Catherine's loneliness. And neither of you knows just how deeply this new thread will tie itself into her fate. You feel the tide inside the English court begin to change, slowly. Cautiously, like a hesitant sunrise, but enough that you notice its warmth brushing against Catherine's life. Her financial troubles haven't disappeared. Her future isn't guaranteed, and her place in the kingdom is still uncertain. But something begins to shift the moment the negotiations with Spain and England reopen. You walk beside her through the Great Hall one morning when an ambassador bows deeply before her. His expression lighter than usual, as if the knot tightening around her fate has loosened by a fraction. Word spreads, soft as footsteps on old stone. The idea of Catherine marrying young Henry, the new heir, has resurfaced. It isn't spoken openly yet, but you hear it in the way courtiers pause when she walks by. In the way they bow a little deeper. In the way her name appears more frequently in hushed conversations. You sense the ripple effect long before Catherine allows herself to acknowledge it. She remains cautious, measured, controlled. You watch her wrap her shawl more tightly as she steps into the cold outer courtyard. Snow crunching beneath her feet. She knows better than to trust rumors. Especially in a court that changes loyalties faster than you change your bedsheets. She walks with the same gentle dignity she always has, chin lifted. Gaze steady, though you notice her hands trembling slightly inside her sleeves. Is it the cold, the uncertainty, the flicker of a possibility she doesn't dare name? Even she may not know. But everything becomes more real the day King Henry VII invites her to dinner. You're seated behind her, watching the scene unfold. A long table stretches down the hall. Torches casting a warm glow that fails to reach the icy corners. The king sits stiffly at the head, measuring every person in the room. Catherine enters in a gown carefully mended by her ladies. The stitches nearly invisible unless you look too closely, which, of course, some do. Yet she moves as if she's dressed in silk fresh from a royal loom. Her grace doesn't rely on fabric. Henry, now 16, sits across from her. The moment he sees her, his posture shifts. That subtle mix of eagerness and restraint he uses whenever he's trying to appear older. More king-like, his eyes soften. Catherine offers him a small smile, warm but appropriately reserved. Throughout dinner, the king watches them with sharp interest, weighing each glance, each word, each breath between them. Henry speaks when spoken to. Though every so often you catch him looking at Catherine with that spark of admiration he can't fully hide. Catherine keeps her responses measured, thoughtful, precise, never encouraging, never dismissive. You sense the delicate balance she's holding, measuring her own words with the skill of someone who understands how fragile her circumstances are. A lesser-known detail drifts into your awareness like a whisper. At one of these early dinners, Catherine impressed the king by discussing theology with surprising brilliance. Not the shallow, ceremonial kind, real theology. complex arguments, textual interpretation. Henry VII reportedly sat back in surprise, seeing not a stranded widow but a mind sharp enough to shape kingdoms. You see it too, the way she speaks with quiet authority, never condescending yet undeniably commanding. For a moment, the room listens to her as if she actually belongs there. That night marks a subtle shift. The king's courtiers begin treating her with more respect. The servants whisper hopeful things when they carry trays past her door. Even her household receives slightly larger allowances, though still far from enough. Something is changing, something is opening. You go with her the next morning to chapel, a habit she never abandons. The air is cold, her breath visible in the dim light. She kneels before the altar, her back straight, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her prayers are the same as always, steady, disciplined, sincere, but today, there is a thread of something new woven between them. Not hope exactly, more like readiness, the readiness to face whatever path God may present. When you leave the chapel, the world seems larger somehow. Not warmer, not easier, but wider, like possibilities that had been locked away underground are beginning to break through the frost. And then, one afternoon, it happens. Henry seeks her out again. You're walking with Catherine in one of the palace galleries, passing dusty tapestries and portraits that seem determined to stare judgmentally at everyone. Snow taps gently against the leaded windows. Catherine pauses to study an old painting, something about English saints looking sternly heroic, and that's when Henry appears at the far end of the hall. He's not dressed for ceremony today. Just a simple doublet, his hair slightly tousled, cheeks flushed from sword practice. When he sees her, his entire expression softens in a way that would be impossible for anyone else at court to miss. He walks toward her with the steady steps of someone trying very hard not to look like he is hurrying. He greets her. She returns the greeting with perfect formality. You can practically feel the air lean closer. Henry clears his throat, glances sideways, then speaks with a blend of boyish sincerity and rehearsed gravity. He hopes she is comfortable. He hopes she is treated well. He hopes her ladies lack for nothing. Catherine thanks him politely, calm, composed, her voice steady, but the corner of her mouth lifts ever so slightly. It's not flirtation, it's gratitude, recognition, a small lantern of warmth in a long winter. Henry stumbles slightly over his next words, the way people do when they're trying to sound casual about something that absolutely is not casual. He mentions the recent discussions between England and Spain, carefully, cautiously, clearly trying not to imply anything too boldly. Catherine listens, her expression thoughtful, her gaze unwavering. She doesn't encourage him, but she doesn't step away either. And that is enough to set the court buzzing for weeks. The negotiations intensify. Letters fly back and forth. Advisors argue. Spanish ambassadors pace hallways so often the stone might be worn down. You hear conflicting theories from diplomats who absolutely believe they're the smartest people alive despite being wrong at least half the time. Historians still debate this period endlessly. Some say Catherine wanted the match. Some say she resisted. Some say Henry VII planned it from the start. Others claim he opposed it until the final hour. But standing next to Catherine now, you understand the truth hiding between all those competing theories. She wasn't chasing destiny. She was waiting for clarity, waiting for God's direction, waiting for the world to give her a place again. And slowly, painfully, cautiously, that place begins to take shape. Her future isn't secure yet. Her troubles aren't over. But the light is beginning to return behind her eyes. The tension in her footsteps eases. Her prayers grow steadier, softer, more peaceful. And as you watch her walk through the echoing corridor, the winter sunlight catching the edges of her veil, you sense the beginning of something new, something still fragile, still uncertain, but undeniably real. Catherine is no longer just existing. She is becoming. A queen is forming quietly in the shadows. And the rest of England is just beginning to notice. The days begin to stretch a little longer. Not because the English sun suddenly remembers how to shine, but because Catherine's world is changing, subtly, steadily, like a tide rising beneath your feet. You sense it even before she does. A new kind of momentum building around her. The kind that hums through corridors and lingers in conversations long after people walk away. And then, one morning, as you join her for another quiet walk through the palace gardens, something remarkable happens. The sound of hurried footsteps approaches an ambassador. Breathless, determined, carrying news that seems to pulse in the cold air. Spain and England have reached a decision. Or at least the beginnings of one. You watch Catherine pause, her breath forming a pale cloud, her hands folding gently in front of her. The ambassador bows deeply and begins to speak. The Prince of Wales, Henry, is officially being considered as her future husband. The negotiations are no longer vague murmurs in taverns or whispered speculations in shadowy hallways. They're on parchment now, ink still drying. Catherine listens without a single twitch betraying her thoughts. Her composure is almost eerie in its perfection. You, meanwhile, feel your heart doing awkward, excited somersaults because you've watched her endure months, years, of isolation, uncertainty, and near poverty. And now, at last, the world is beginning to move in her favor. But while the political machinery stirs, Catherine has another role to play. One far more urgent, far more visceral. England is preparing for war. The Scottish border is burning again. King James IV is rallying troops. Tension swells like a storm cloud. And here's the part that catches you entirely off guard. Catherine finds herself at the center of England's response, not as a passive observer, not as a mere figurehead, but as a key participant in the War Council. You find yourself walking behind her on a crisp morning as she enters the council chamber. It smells of parchment, sweat, wool cloaks damp with rain. Generals and advisors bow as she steps forward. You feel the weight of their eyes, the quiet skepticism, the polite curiosity, the grudging respect. Catherine carries herself with an ease that suggests she's been preparing for this her whole life. And in a way, she has. Her mother, Queen Isabella, wasn't just a monarch, she was a battlefield commander. Catherine grew up hearing the clatter of armor, the rhythm of marching soldiers, the strategic debates echoing across war tents. She knows war, not romantically, not from stories, but as an adult reality. It shows. The council speaks of troop numbers, provisions, diplomacy. Catherine listens, absorbs, then gives input sharper and more informed than half the men at the table. She suggests fortifying certain routes, reminds them of past Scottish strategies, speaks calmly of the need to balance defense with morale. The generals exchange glances, impressed. Then comes the moment no one expected. When Henry VIII, newly crowned king after his father's death, marches north to face France, with the absurd amount of bravado typical of 20-year-old kings. He leaves Catherine as regent of England. Yes, regent. In his absence, Catherine is the ruler. You feel the jolt of that truth as strongly as she must. One day, she is a political pawn, the next, she is entrusted with the kingdom, its armies, its budget, its entire stability. Historians still argue whether Henry intended this as a test, a gesture of trust, or a necessity, but the result is the same. Catherine steps into the role with quiet, relentless competence. When the Scottish forces approach the border, England trembles, supplies are rushed to fortresses, priests lead anxious prayers, villagers brace themselves for raids. And Catherine? She doesn't panic, she moves with purpose, meeting commanders, signing orders, writing letters in a hand so steady it looks almost defiant. By late summer, the kingdom buzzes with tension so thick you feel it in your throat. And then word arrives, fast, breathless, urgent. The Scottish army has invaded. The war has begun. Catherine reacts with the controlled intensity of a woman who has waited her entire life for the world to give her a purpose. She rides north, not into battle, but close enough to command from the field. Armor beneath her gown, her hair swept up beneath a riding hood. You sit beside her in the jolting carriage, feeling every rock of the wheels, every gust of sharp northern wind. She writes letter after letter, directives, encouragements, strategic recommendations. She meets with commanders. She prays with soldiers. She steadies frightened citizens with words that cut through fear like a clear bell. And through all of it, she remains composed, focused, unyielding. You sense the spark of Isabella in her, the steel beneath the silk. And then, one night, as you both sit in a drafty tent, a messenger arrives dripping with sweat and rain. England has won. At Flodden, King James IV is dead. The Scottish nobility is shattered. English troops stand victorious. And Catherine, Regent Catherine, is the quiet, unwavering force behind the triumph. She exhales slowly, her shoulders relaxing just enough for you to see the fatigue hidden beneath her strength. But she doesn't celebrate, not yet. She writes a letter to Henry, informing him of the victory with dignity rather than triumph. The story goes that she even sent him a piece of James IV's coat. Some versions say she offered to send the body. Others say she held back out of respect. You sense the truth hovering somewhere in the middle, softened by time. Then comes the little-known detail that surprises even you. Catherine actually wanted to ride further north, to continue supporting the troops. But her advisors begged her to return. They feared the symbolism, the queen too close to battle, the regency lacking its figurehead. Reluctantly, she agreed. As she journeys south, you feel the weight of what has just happened settle across the land like a quiet, powerful echo. The victory at Flodden isn't just a military success. It is Catherine's emergence, not as a pawn, not as a stranded widow, but as a queen of substance, intellect, and resilience. When she arrives back at court, the atmosphere crackles with respect. Nobles who once pitied her now bow deeply. Servants look upon her with admiration. And Henry? He returns from France to find his kingdom stable, his borders secure, and his wife already a legend. Catherine doesn't boast. She doesn't seek applause. She doesn't demand reward. She simply steps back into her role with the same serene dignity she always had, only now she carries the authority of a woman who has led a nation through war. As you walk beside her across the polished stone floors, you feel the shift in the air, the subtle nods, the silence when she enters a room, the understanding that this woman, this calm, devout, determined woman, is not to be underestimated. Catherine of Aragon is no longer waiting for fate to give her a place. She has claimed one, and the rest of the world is beginning to understand exactly who she is. The celebration of Flodden fades more quickly than you expect, victories always do. England moves on with the restless churn of a kingdom that never stops needing something. A new treaty, a new feast, a new heir, and it's that last need, the one whispered behind tapestries and murmured in chapel aisles, that begins to press against Catherine like a tightening band around her ribs. You walk with her through the palace gardens, now green again after the harsh northern winds. Spring has returned, carrying with it soft sunlight and 1,000 anxious expectations. Catherine's steps are measured, steady, but you feel the undercurrent beneath them, a quiet longing, a determined hope, a fear she refuses to give voice to. Because now she must give England something it desperately craves, a son. It begins with joy. Catherine's first pregnancy is greeted with fanfare, cheers, and the kind of exuberant optimism you'd associate with people who have definitely not read ahead in history. The court celebrates endlessly. Ministers bow with relieved smiles. Henry beams with the smug pride of a man who believes everything in his life will always go exactly the way he commands it to. You accompany Catherine as she moves through the palace. Every step watched, every gesture noted. Servants hover, ladies fuss, physicians speak with the pompous confidence of men who think they invented childbirth. Catherine, however, remains gracious, poised, quietly thrilled. But the joy doesn't last. A sharp pain, a sudden stillness, the muffled panic of midwives, the heavy silence afterward. The child is stillborn. You feel the blow strike Catherine like a physical force. She lies in bed, pale, exhausted, her gaze unfocused as Henry tries to mask his disappointment with forced tenderness. He kisses her forehead, he murmurs reassurances, but you feel his grief curling beneath the surface. Sharp and impatient, he leaves sooner than he should. Catherine closes her eyes, and you feel her swallow the sorrow whole, burying it beneath layers of faith and composure. Her ladies cry quietly in corners. The court grows uneasy again, as if the walls themselves have started whispering. Still, Catherine does not falter. She prays, she heals, she rises. And soon, far sooner than you expect, she is pregnant again. This time, the excitement is quieter, more careful, like everyone has learned to tiptoe around hope. Catherine carries the child with the same disciplined serenity she brings to everything. Her steps slow, her hands linger at her belly. Her prayers grow longer, whispered in dim corridors where candlelight trembles as if listening. You sit beside her during an afternoon embroidery session. Watching her thread move with calm precision, she talks softly about names, about God's will, about the future she dares to imagine. Her smile is gentle, filled with a fragile kind of radiance. Months pass. Then, finally, the moment arrives. A child, a boy. For a breathless instant, the world erupts in joy. Bells ring, courtiers cheer. Henry nearly levitates from pride, shouting to anyone within a 5-mile radius that he has accomplished the most important task known to kings. Catherine holds the infant with awe, tears brightening her eyes. You feel the warmth in the room, the relief, the triumph. But the joy lasts only 7 weeks. The baby dies in the night. No warning, no miracle, just a silent, devastating stillness. The grief that follows is suffocating. You watch Catherine collapse into herself, her hands trembling as she clutches at blankets, rosaries, anything she can hold. Her sobs are soundless, swallowed into her throat, but you feel everyone like a blow. The ladies weep openly now. Even the servants move with bowed heads. Henry withdraws, quietly at first. Then more obviously, he keeps to his hunting, his music, his sports, anything that distracts him from the gnawing emptiness of lost legacy. It's not cruelty, it's fear. Fear that Catherine feels too intimately. Fear neither of them knows how to soothe. Yet Catherine rises again. There is something almost superhuman in her ability to stand after being broken. She straightens her shoulders. She resumes her duties. She walks through the palace with that same steady grace. Even though her steps feel heavier now to you, like each one carries an invisible weight. Then comes another pregnancy, and another heartbreak, a miscarriage. You see Catherine clutching the edge of her bed, teeth gritted against pain that is more emotional than physical. Henry sits beside her for a few minutes, a hand on hers. A strained smile, but he leaves early, restless and confused, seeking noise to drown out his fear. Historians still debate the nature of their marriage during these years. Some insist Henry was tender and devoted. Others claim he was already growing distant. But as you walk beside Catherine through her most vulnerable moments, you see a truth that's neither romanticized nor cruel. Henry cared deeply, but his care was fragile, full of cracks that would widen over time. His love was real, but his patience finite. Catherine knew this, yet she offered him unwavering loyalty, wrapped in a faith so profound it almost intimidates you. And then, at last, a surviving birth. A girl, Princess Mary. The celebration is exuberant, but underneath it all lies a subtle disappointment. A daughter is a blessing, a hope, a joy, but not the heir Henry wants. Still, Catherine beams with pride as she holds Mary, her smile warm enough to soften even the coldest English morning. Mary is healthy, bright-eyed, strong. Catherine dotes on her, sings to her, cradles her as if holding the whole world. You watch her motherhood unfold with gentle patience, the kind that makes the palace seem less harsh, less shadowed. Yet you also see the truth in Henry's forced smiles. He loves his daughter, truly, but he hungers for a son. The court feels it too. Advisors whisper, midwives prepare. Catherine knows another pregnancy will come, and another risk, and another cycle of hope and fear. One evening, as Catherine sits in her private chapel, you feel the room settle into a deep stillness. She kneels, hands clasped, eyes closed. She prays for strength, for peace, for her daughter's future, for Henry's happiness, for God's mercy. Her voice trembles only once, the slightest quiver, before she steels herself again. She whispers, "Let me be worthy." You think she already is, more than anyone around her realizes. A strange, lesser-known fact drifts into your awareness during one of her pregnancies. Catherine insisted on personally overseeing charitable works in London even against her physician's advice. She walked among the poor, the sick, the cold, offering comfort where she had so little to spare. Her ladies panicked, her doctors protested, but Catherine said nothing could keep her from her duty. And as you walk with her back through the candlelit corridors, you feel the echo of that strength trailing behind her like a cloak. Historians still debate why some of her pregnancies failed. Illness? Stress? God's will? No answer satisfies, but the debates continue, whispering across centuries like restless ghosts. Catherine, meanwhile, keeps walking forward, even when hope cuts her. Even when grief hollows her. Even when her body betrays her. Even when Henry's disappointment grows sharp enough to sense in every room. She remains steadfast, a woman of faith, dignity, and endurance. And you, walking quietly beside her, feel the growing tension in the air, the pressure, the expectation, the fractures beginning to appear at the edges of her life. Her daughter thrives. Her marriage strains. Her heart endures. And somewhere in the distance, small at first, almost imperceptible, the shadow of another woman begins to flicker into existence. But Catherine cannot see that yet. Right now, she is simply surviving, and surviving with a grace that leaves the world breathless. You feel it before you see it, a change in the air so delicate, so faint, that at first you think it's nothing more than a trick of your tired imagination. Catherine is walking beside you through the long gallery, sunlight slanting across the polished floor, Mary's laughter drifting faintly from the distant nursery. Everything seems peaceful, or at least as peaceful as life ever gets inside a Tudor palace. And yet, something hums beneath the surface. A tension, a shift, a thin thread vibrating with a new, unfamiliar energy. It begins, as these things always do, with a whisper, a name, Anne Boleyn. You hear it first from a cluster of ladies near the window. Their voices hushed but sharp with curiosity. Catherine doesn't notice, she's focused on a letter from her father. Brow furrowing as she reads about Spanish politics that somehow always manage to be both urgent and deeply tedious. But you notice, you hear the name again later in the day. Floating from the pages of a court report, murmured by a musician in passing, mentioned by a servant lighting candles along the chapel aisle. Anne Boleyn. Small, soft, harmless. A footnote in Catherine's world. For now, you walk with Catherine through the great chamber where nobles gossip over cups of spiced wine. Mary is brought in by her nurse, cheeks flushed from play, and Catherine's entire face brightens, real joy. Unguarded and warm, she scoops her daughter into her arms, kisses her forehead, smooths her tiny dark curls. For a moment, all the pressures of queenship, war, diplomacy, miscarriages, Henry's growing impatience, fade away. And then Henry enters. He spots Catherine immediately and smiles. But the corners of it are softer, dimmer than they once were. His gaze shifts quickly, too quickly, to Mary. He lifts her, spins her, makes her squeal with delight. Catherine laughs, though you can feel the faint tug of longing beneath her smile. They are a family in motion, bound by affection, but there is a slight unevenness now, small cracks forming where once there had been seamless harmony. You see it when Henry glances toward a group of ladies across the room. Just a flicker of curiosity. Barely a second. Barely anything. But you catch it. Because you're watching closely. Because you sense what's coming. Because history is starting to tug at the hem of your consciousness. Catherine doesn't see it, of course she doesn't. She trusts Henry. She loves him. She believes their bond, forged in shared faith and grief and duty, is solid enough to weather anything. She believes her role is secure. She believes her marriage is unbreakable. And she believes her purpose is still, always, to provide England with stability, morality, and heirs. So she keeps moving through her days with dignified routine. But you notice how the court changes around her. Young women arrive, bright, polished, eager to climb the ladder of favor. The Boleyn sisters among them. Mary Boleyn first, known for her soft smile and questionable reputation. She captures Henry's attention briefly. A small flame that flares and fades almost before anyone can comment on it. Catherine hears the rumors but dismisses them. Kings have their lapses, their seasonal distractions, their temporary wanderings. As long as he returns, emotionally, politically, spiritually, to her, she can endure the rest. It's an uncomfortable truth she carries quietly, wrapped in centuries of royal precedent. But Anne is different. You first notice her during a court masque. She isn't dazzling in the conventional way, not a Helen of Troy with a neck-breaking glow. Instead, she radiates something far more dangerous, intention. She moves with precision, eyes sharp, smile calculated. When she curtsies, it's a study in controlled grace. When she speaks, her voice slips into the air like silk, smooth, confident, pointed. Henry notices. Of course he does. You feel the subtle shift in the room every time she passes. She leaves behind a faint trail of spark, curiosity, speculation, intrigue. The men watch her. The women whisper, the ambassadors take notes, and Henry's gaze, once scattered, now lingers. Not long, not often, but long enough for the court to inhale sharply and wait. Catherine remains unaware of the gathering storm. She moves through her duties as queen, overseeing charitable works, hosting ambassadors, managing her household with the careful balance of kindness and discipline she's known for. She wears rich gowns again, the treasury finally supporting her position properly. Her hair is braided neatly, her veil pinned with jewels that reflect candlelight. She looks every inch a queen, an image of order in a kingdom that constantly teeters on the edge of chaos. But even the stones under your feet know what's coming. One afternoon, you accompany Catherine to the chapel for Vespers. Sunlight filters through the stained glass, turning the air into shifting mosaics of red, gold, and deep blue. Catherine kneels, hands folded, her voice steady as she prays. Behind you, the door opens quietly. Soft steps approach. Anne. She moves to a pew. her posture perfect, her eyes fixed on the altar, but not really. You sense her awareness of everything. Who is watching? Who is whispering? Who is calculating? Catherine doesn't look back. She doesn't see the way Anne's gaze flickers briefly toward her, studying her with an intensity that feels almost evaluative. History still debates this moment, if it happened at all. Some say Catherine noticed Anne immediately. Others argue she remained oblivious for years. But in this quiet, sacred space, you feel the future narrowing, tightening, curling around the two women like an invisible thread. After prayers, Catherine rises with her usual serene dignity. She passes Anne with a polite nod, unaware of the way the younger woman dips into a deeper curtsy than necessary, an early gesture of strategy wrapped in respect. Later, as you walk with Catherine through the corridor, you hear her humming softly under her breath, a Spanish lullaby, one she used to sing to Mary. Her voice is gentle, filled with tender melancholy. She thinks of her daughter, of the children she lost, of her duties, of her marriage. She has no idea that Henry, restless from disappointment and power in youth, has begun to drift. A strange detail surfaces in your mind. Anne spent years in the French court, where she learned polished flirtation, subtle politics, and the art of withholding. She did not behave like English ladies. She behaved like a woman trained to captivate kings. And Henry, for all his power, was deeply, painfully susceptible to admiration he had to work for. Catherine cannot see this. Not yet. She believes her marriage is anchored in faith, shared hardship, and destiny. You watch her pause near a window, the pale English light turning her veil silver. She places a hand over her heart, thinking, perhaps, of the future she still hopes to build. A future with more children, a future with a stronger marriage, a future where God rewards her loyalty with peace. She whispers a prayer in Spanish, soft enough that only you hear it. And behind you, somewhere deep in the palace, you can almost sense Anne Boleyn smiling, not with malice, not with triumph, but with anticipation. Catherine walks on, still queen, still beloved, still hopeful, and still completely unaware of how fragile her world is beginning to become. The atmosphere in the palace begins to thicken, not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like dust settling in a room no one bothers to open windows for anymore. You walk beside Catherine through those same familiar corridors, hearing the distant chatter of courtiers, the rustle of silk, the murmured exchanges behind half-closed doors. And you feel the shape of something shifting around her. It's subtle at first, a glance held too long, a conversation that stops when she enters, a pause before a bow. Little things, harmless things, things you would ignore if the air weren't so strangely charged. But then one morning, Catherine receives a summons from Henry. Nothing unusual on its own. Wives, even queens, see their husbands, but the tone of the message is different. Polite, formal, stiff. You watch her rise from her writing desk, smoothing the folds of her gown. She tucks a loose strand of hair beneath her veil. She breathes in, steadying herself, though she doesn't know why she needs steadying yet. When you arrive with her in the king's chamber, Henry is pacing. Pacing is never good with him. It means his emotions have outrun his logic, and he's trying to catch them, or justify them. He doesn't greet Catherine with the warmth he once had. Instead, he clears his throat and speaks about something called the king's great matter. You feel the temperature in the room drop. Catherine tilts her head slightly, listening with that calm attentiveness she has mastered so completely it could be taught in monasteries. Henry begins to speak of scripture, of divine law, of the belief, sudden, dramatic, entirely convenient, that their marriage is invalid in the eyes of God because she was once married to his brother. Catherine blinks once, slowly, not in shock, but in assessment, because she has heard this argument before. Years ago, whispered by ambassadors, thrown around by theologians, quickly dismissed, but now Henry speaks with intensity, almost feverish, as if this idea has been gnawing at him quietly for months and finally chewed its way to the surface. He insists that their lack of surviving sons is proof of divine displeasure. His voice tightens when he says it, and you feel that tension ripple through Catherine like ice water. Not because the claim is cruel, though it is, but because it reveals something far deeper, his shifting heart. She listens in silence until he finishes, his chest heaving slightly from the effort of justifying himself. Then she answers, softly, steadily, with a clarity that slices through the nonsense like a blade through silk. Their marriage, she reminds him, was sanctioned by the Pope, blessed by the Church, founded on prayer, shared duty, shared grief, shared victories. She places her hand against her heart and speaks of her innocence, of the truth that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated. A truth she has held firmly for decades. A truth Henry once used to secure their union. A truth that now becomes the battlefield itself. You watch Henry's eyes flicker, guilt, conflict, stubbornness, before he looks away. He can't meet her gaze. Not because she is wrong, but because she is right with such serene certainty that it unsettles him. But it doesn't matter. Something else is driving him now. Something, or someone. Anne's name does not leave his lips. Not yet, but it floats unspoken between them, heavy as a storm cloud. The king's great matter isn't about theology. It isn't about heirs. It isn't about divine judgment. It's about desire. And Catherine feels it, even if she refuses to name it. After the meeting, you walk with her down a long hallway lit by wavering candlelight. Her steps are precise, deliberate, but her breath catches once, so quietly you almost miss it. She pauses near a tapestry depicting Judith beheading Holofernes. The irony hangs thick in the air. She touches the fabric lightly, then withdraws her hand. She doesn't cry. She doesn't rage. She simply continues walking, back straight, chin lifted, as if her dignity is a cloak she refuses to remove. But the court senses the shift. And like wolves catching a scent, they begin to circle. Ambassadors start asking her carefully crafted questions. Her ladies exchange nervous glances. Servants whisper behind doors. The rumor spreads. The king seeks an annulment. And amidst all the political murmuring, a lesser-known detail slips into your awareness. Catherine begins receiving more letters from scholars across Europe, even ones she has never met, offering comfort, offering theological arguments, offering support. Word of Henry's intentions is spreading far beyond England's borders, stirring unease in courts everywhere. Catherine's reputation, her piety, her lifelong devotion have made her a symbol. And symbols have a way of gathering allies. One evening, you find her in her private chapel. The candles burn low, casting a golden halo around her. She kneels, hands clasped, whispering prayers not of fear but of strength. Her lips move steadily, without tremor. Her voice is soft, but resolute. You feel the weight of her conviction pressing gently into the air. She will not surrender her marriage. Not to palace whispers, not to political pressure, not to Henry's wavering heart. She rises slowly, smoothing her veil, and walks out into the corridor where the shadows gather like silent spectators. Her eyes are calm, steady, almost luminous with determination. But then you notice something new. She avoids certain rooms now. She avoids certain conversations. She avoids certain glances. She knows Anne is rising. She feels it in the way Henry's temper sharpens, in the way courtiers adjust their loyalties, in the way the Queen's apartments grow quieter each week. Then, one afternoon in the Great Hall, Catherine hears the name spoken aloud. Anne Boleyn. Bold, bright, rising. A lady drops her embroidery. A lord clears his throat. Catherine continues stitching, but you see the slightest tightening in her jaw. She has been queen for so long, beloved, respected, unchallenged, that the idea of a newcomer threatening that foundation feels almost unreal. Almost impossible. Almost. But reality is shifting beneath her feet, grain by grain. Later that day, you accompany her to a private audience with an ambassador. As they discuss political alliances, you notice Catherine's composure sharpen. Her voice grows firmer. Her gaze cools. She is no longer simply the gracious queen. She is a strategist, a defender of her crown, a woman preparing for a battle she never wanted but refuses to lose. Historians still debate when Catherine fully understood she was facing not a rumor, not a temporary distraction, but a war for the very legitimacy of her life. Some argue it happened slowly. Others believe she knew immediately. Standing beside her now, you see the truth. She knows. She knows Henry's mind is changing. She knows the court is shifting. She knows the church may be tested. She knows her daughter's future hangs in the balance. And she knows, above all, that this is no longer about a king's whims. This is about justice, truth, vows, God. The great matter has begun. And Catherine of Aragon is stepping into it with the quiet, resolute strength of a woman who refuses, absolutely refuses, to surrender. The echo of Henry's declaration lingers long after he dismisses Catherine from his chamber. Like a storm rumbling behind closed doors, you walk beside her as she returns to her apartments. Her steps slow but steady. Her face calm in that extraordinary way she has, calm not because she feels no fear, but because she refuses to let fear speak for her. The corridors stretch ahead, lined with portraits of past kings and queens whose eyes seem to follow her with unsettling curiosity, as if even they are waiting to see what she will do next. She reaches her chamber, sits at her writing desk, and lifts her quill with deliberate grace. But before she puts ink to parchment, she stops, just for a heartbeat. Her hands tremble ever so slightly. And you feel the weight of everything pressing down on her, grief for her lost children, dread for what's coming, and a deep, unshakable resolve rising like steel beneath the surface. When she begins writing, Her script is steady as ever. She writes not to Henry, not to her father, not to an ally, but to God. Her prayers turn into quiet declarations of truth and innocence, whispered so softly that even you have to lean in to hear them. Then it begins. The hearings, the inquiries, the gathering storm of public opinion. And Catherine, quiet, devout, steadfast Catherine, steps into the fire without flinching. The first hearing takes place in a great chamber heavy with anticipation, wooden beams, stone pillars, tapestries muffling the murmurs of spectators. You stand beside her as she walks through the hall, her gown sweeping across the floor like a whisper of dignity. Her ladies trail behind, anxious and pale. Henry sits on the far side, regally posed but visibly uncomfortable, fidgeting with his reins, his gaze darting away every time Catherine draws near. The court rises for her. Of course they do. For all the shifting loyalties, Catherine's reputation stands solid as bedrock. She bows her head slightly, not in submission but in acknowledgement. She sees the people who still honor her, the ones who know her as a queen in more than name. When proceedings begin, Henry's lawyers present their arguments with confident bravado, citing scripture with aggressive enthusiasm. They speak of Leviticus, of forbidden unions, of divine punishment. Their voices echo sharply, bouncing off stone, trying to pin guilt where guilt does not belong. Catherine remains motionless, her face serene, absorbing every word with quiet attentiveness. And then, finally, the moment arrives. Her moment. They ask her to respond. You watch her rise, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who knows the truth is on her side. She steps forward, each footfall a statement stronger than any argument, and curtsies before the judges. Then, without turning away, she walks directly toward Henry. You inhale sharply. The entire room does. Even the tapestries seem to hold their breath. She kneels before him, not as a supplicant, not as a defeated wife, but as a queen asserting her truth in front of the man who is trying to erase her. Her voice is soft, steady, striking. She reminds him of their years together, of her unwavering loyalty, of her faith, of their shared joys and sorrows, of the moral and legal foundation of their marriage. And then, with devastating clarity, she addresses the heart of the issue. She declares, firmly, that her first marriage to Arthur was never consummated. She says it not with shame but with conviction, her gaze piercing Henry's defenses more effectively than any argument inked on parchment. You watch Henry's face tense, his eyes flickering with guilt, with frustration, with something raw and uneasy. Catherine continues, stating that she has served him faithfully, that she has never offended him, that she has been a true wife in every way, and when she adds that she leaves him and the world to God and her conscience. The chamber falls silent. A lesser-known detail floats through your awareness. Foreign ambassadors who witnessed this moment wrote later that it was one of the most powerful displays of dignity they had ever seen in a royal court. Some described tears in their eyes. Others claimed that even hardened clerics were moved. You feel that truth now. The room swells with reverence, with something like awe. Henry tries to interrupt, embarrassed by the emotion she has stirred. Catherine stands, turns, and walks away slowly, refusing to allow even the judges to stop her. She will not remain in a court where her integrity is questioned. She refuses to surrender her dignity to a political spectacle. When she exits the chamber, the hallways outside erupt in murmurs. Some bow deeply as she passes. Others wipe at their eyes. A few fall silent, recognizing that they have witnessed a moment that history will remember far longer than Henry's theological frustrations. You follow Catherine back to her rooms. Her shoulders straight, her pace measured, but once the doors close behind her, she releases a long, trembling breath. Her hands shake now, only now, because she has held her composure like armor for hours. And even her strength has limits. One of her ladies rushes to embrace her, but Catherine shakes her head gently and instead goes to her chapel. She kneels again, not asking for rescue, not begging for pity, but preparing, because she knows the battle has only just begun. Historians still debate the impact of that day. Some say Catherine won the court of public opinion. Others argue Henry grew more determined to break her because of her defiance. But you, standing here beside her now, understand the truth that doesn't fit neatly into historical analysis. Catherine's courage didn't change Henry's heart. It changed the world's memory of her. The hearings continue for weeks. Henry grows more irritable. Court factions sharpen like daggers. Anne's influence strengthens, though she still avoids direct confrontation with the Queen. Catherine, meanwhile, maintains her calm. She answers every question with precision. She never contradicts herself. She never raises her voice. She never loses her dignity, not once. One evening, as the sun sets over the palace courtyard, you find Catherine standing by her window, watching the fading light turn the sky to gold. Her face is thoughtful but peaceful. God will judge the truth, she whispers. You realize she believes that fully, not as a strategy, not as an excuse, but as the anchor that holds her steady while the world tries to pull her apart. She closes the window softly. The trials are far from over. But Catherine of Aragon is no longer defending herself. She is defending the truth. And the truth, spoken with such quiet, unwavering strength, echoes louder than any accusation dared to challenge her with. The court no longer feels like a home, it feels like a chessboard. Every corridor is a diagonal threat. Every bow has an angle. Every whisper carries coordinates. You walk beside Catherine through this shifting landscape, and it's impossible not to feel how the ground changes beneath her feet. Not abruptly, not with the violence of an earthquake, but with the slow, deliberate pressure of a tide rising under stone. The hearings continue. The judges consult scrolls as thick as pillows. Ambassadors send frantic letters to their monarchs. Priests debate theology with the earnestness of men who are definitely compensating for something. And yet, beneath all the noise, a quieter transformation is taking place. The court is splitting. Not politely, not cleanly, but like fabric tearing under strain. You see it in the way nobles position themselves in hallways. Some drifting toward Henry's growing circle, young men hungry for favor. Older men hungry for survival, and others clustering near Catherine, bound by loyalty, faith, or simply admiration. The tension is palpable enough to taste. Metallic and cold. One morning, you walk with Catherine into the presence chamber. where she is greeted by a flurry of courtesies, some genuine, some painfully faked, some stiff with fear. The ambassadors of Spain bow deeply, their eyes full of fierce support. The French envoy nods cautiously. Several English nobles meet her gaze with steady respect. But others avoid her eyes entirely, looking past her as if she has already faded from their world. She notices. Of course she notices. But she responds the way she always does, with dignity that refuses to bend. Then Anne enters. Not ostentatiously, not recklessly. Anne is far too intelligent for that. She moves like someone who has practiced this moment 1,000 times, graceful, poised, wearing a gown the color of late summer wine. Every step she takes is measured. A quiet declaration of confidence. The room shifts around her, bodies tilting subtly toward the new center of gravity. Anne curtsies to Catherine, deeply, impeccably, and Catherine acknowledges her with a nod that is calm, gentle, perhaps even warm. Catherine still believes in courtesy, even toward the person who is unraveling her life one thread at a time. But you see the momentary flicker behind Anne's eyes. Not guilt, not triumph, something cooler, calculating. She holds her smile a heartbeat too long, like a musician testing the acoustics before playing the real melody. As the court disperses, you hear murmurs rise like smoke. She will be the next queen. It is only a matter of time. The king hardly leaves her side. Catherine walks on, head high, shoulders steady, refusing to let any of it reach her expression. But inside, there's a storm swirling, silent and suffocating. Later that afternoon, she meets with her counsel. You sit with her in a chamber lined with shelves of dusty legal manuscripts. The air thick with candle smoke. Her advisors speak urgently, gesturing at documents and precedents and papal decrees. They talk over one another, trying to find the argument that will save her. Catherine listens in silence. When she finally speaks, her voice is soft, but the whole room stills. I will stand by my marriage, she says, because it is true. Her lawyers bow their heads. Moved, one even wipes his eyes discreetly. You understand the gesture. Catherine's clarity has a weight to it, an iron core wrapped in velvet. But the battle is becoming crueler by the day. Henry's behavior shifts like a weather vane in a thunderstorm. Some mornings he is kind, almost tender. Other mornings he storms through chambers demanding updates, questioning Catherine's motives, accusing her of obstinacy. He insists he is acting for England, for morality, for God, anything but the truth he refuses to face. And in the shadows, Anne's influence sharpens. She grows bolder, though always within the limits of decorum. She refuses Henry's advances until he promises marriage, a strategy that perplexes half the court and terrifies the rest. She withholds, not to tease, but to control. It is the slow forging of an invisible chain, link by link. A lesser-known fact drifts into your awareness like a cold draft. Anne's family, especially her father and uncle, begin maneuvering their positions with slick precision. They court foreign alliances. They flatter Henry. They push Anne into rooms where important eyes can see her. It's strategy disguised as coincidence. And Catherine? She feels the walls closing in. One evening, you accompany her to the Queen's chapel. Her ladies light candles around her until the air glows with warm, Flickering halos. Catherine kneels, hands clasped, eyes closed. She whispers prayers, each one a quiet stone laid at the foundation of her resolve. You feel the trembling beneath her breath, not fear, but sorrow, deep, aching sorrow. She whispers names. Her lost children. Her parents. Henry. Mary. Especially Mary. If Catherine loses this battle, Mary loses everything: her title, her inheritance, her future. Catherine prays for her daughter with the fierce tenderness of a mother whose heart has been carved into 1,000 pieces. When she finishes, she remains kneeling for a long moment, letting the silence gather around her like a cloak. Then she rises, slow, deliberate, regal, and walks back into the corridors with renewed resolve. The next hearing meets in a room swarmed with tension. Catherine stands tall as the King's Council presents new arguments. More forceful, more desperate, but when her turn comes, she answers every question with the same exquisite composure. Her words so precise they feel carved from bone. At one point, a judge presses her, gently, but pointedly, asking whether she might consider stepping aside, for the peace of the realm. Catherine's eyes sharpen, her voice remains soft. The peace of the realm, she answers, has never depended on the breaking of a just marriage. You feel the sentence ripple through the chamber like a quiet earthquake. The debate rages, tempers flare, papers rustle, but Catherine remains a still point in a spinning world. Historians still argue over this period, whether Catherine was heroic or stubborn, whether she fought for love or for principle, whether she understood the full political implications. But standing beside her now, watching her endure humiliation after humiliation with grace that borders on superhuman, you realize none of those debates matter. Because Catherine knows exactly what she is doing. She is defending not only her marriage, not only her daughter, not only herself. She is defending the truth of a lifetime. As evening falls, you walk with her to her private apartments. The corridors are quieter now. Fewer courtiers linger. Fewer friends remain. Catherine pauses near a window, the fading light casting her silhouette in soft gold. She whispers, almost to herself, "I have done nothing wrong, and I will not say that I have." Her voice does not break. Not once. And as the palace sinks into night, you feel it settle deep into your bones. Catherine may lose this battle in the world of men, but in the world of conscience, the world of courage, the world of faith, she is already victorious. And the court, divided as it is, knows it too. The cold arrives early that year, sliding through the palace like an uninvited guest. You feel it in the stone floors beneath your feet, in the draft that creeps under every doorway, in the way Catherine pulls her cloak a little tighter around her shoulders as she walks. But the chill in the air is nothing compared to the deeper cold settling inside the court itself, a cold shaped by politics, pressure, and the quiet cruelty of abandonment. It begins with a letter. A simple letter, delivered by a servant who bows too deeply, as if hoping to vanish into the floor. When Catherine breaks the seal, the world seems to shift. You lean close enough to sense the tension tightening her breath. The message is brief, polite, and devastating. Henry is moving forward. He has petitioned Rome directly. The Pope must decide whether Catherine remains queen. And until that decision is made, she will be relocated. Relocated. A word that hides its own violence. You follow her through the corridors as the news spreads like wildfire. Her ladies whisper frantically. Servants bow with trembling sympathy. Loyal courtiers seek her out in private corners to express their devotion. Their outrage, their helplessness. But others, the ones already aligning themselves with Anne and the king, simply turn away. Letting their silence speak. Catherine collects herself with that iron poise she's perfected over years of hardship. She walks to the audience chamber with shoulders straight and chin lifted. Henry is waiting there, surrounded by advisors whose nervous energy crackles like static. He does not look at her with cruelty. He looks at her with discomfort. With the guilt of a man who has convinced himself he is righteous. He tells her, softly, formally, that she may no longer appear at court. That it is, for her own comfort. That the uncertainty harms her health. That the scrutiny is unfair. He doesn't use the word exile. But that is what it is. Catherine listens without interrupting. She stands so still you can feel the air tighten around her. When he finishes, she bows, not from subservience, but from dignity. She says only, "I am your lawful wife, and I will remain so until death. But I obey God before I obey man." Henry flinches, just slightly. Then he turns away. You walk with her as she leaves the chamber. She moves like a queen, elegant, graceful, unbroken, but the silence is different now. Heavier. Every step echoes through halls she once commanded. She pauses near a window overlooking the courtyard. Snow drifts softly past the glass. The world outside feels distant, muffled, indifferent. For several days, preparations swirl around her. Trunks are packed, carriages readied, servants dismissed or reassigned. Some of Catherine's closest ladies, in a gesture that shatters your heart, volunteer to follow her into isolation. Even knowing the danger, others, pressed by their families or bribed with promises of favor, pull away. Their goodbyes awkward and apologetic. And then comes the moment that truly breaks her. Mary. Henry forbids contact. To strengthen his case. To avoid confusion. To prevent Catherine from influencing her daughter. Catherine hears the decree with a calmness that cracks at the edges. Her hands clasped together so tightly you can see her knuckles whiten. But she doesn't plead. She doesn't argue. She only nods, then sits at her desk and begins writing immediately. A letter to Mary. You stand beside her as she shapes each line with meticulous care. Her quill moving slowly, reverently. She writes in Spanish. The language of intimacy. The language Mary grew up hearing in her mother's voice. She tells her daughter to be obedient, to be patient, to trust in God, to hold her head high, to remember her lineage. And at the end, she writes something so quiet, so fragile, it catches in your chest. Wherever you are, my heart is with you. She seals the letter with wax and a trembling breath. It will never reach Mary. Historians still debate whether Henry personally blocked the letters or whether his advisors acted on their own. Some argue he wished to spare Mary the tension. Others claim he feared Catherine's influence. But whatever the reason, the result is the same. Catherine's letters vanish into the machinery of power. Never delivered. When the day of departure arrives, The court gathers to watch, but not close enough to appear supportive. They linger in archways, behind pillars, pretending not to stare as Catherine descends the stairs toward the waiting carriage. Snowflakes settle in her dark hair. Her cloak billows slightly in the wind. She looks like a figure carved from winter itself, beautiful, solemn, unyielding. You can feel the eyes upon her. Some filled with sorrow. Some with guilt. A few with triumph. Catherine does not waver. The carriage door closes behind her with a heavy thud. You climb in beside her. The interior dim and cold. As the horses start forward, she turns to look back at the palace, not with longing, but with a quiet assessment, as if memorizing the place where she fought so hard for truth. The road stretches ahead, long, winding, lonely. Days pass. You settle into a rhythm of travel punctuated by cold inns, silent meals, occasional prayers whispered against icy windows. Catherine keeps her composure throughout, though you sense the ache beneath her stillness. When she finally reaches Moor Manor, her new residence, though it feels more like a gilded cage, you feel the isolation wrap around her immediately. The building is large but empty, elegant but cold, staffed by servants loyal to the king more than to the queen. Catherine is given a suite of rooms, furnished beautifully but arranged in a way that feels deliberate, too formal, too detached. This is exile disguised as comfort. She explores her rooms quietly, touching the edges of tapestries, running her fingertips along the polished wood of the writing desk, examining the view from the narrow window. Outside, winter trees stand bare and motionless. She closes her eyes for a moment, inhaling the stillness. When she speaks, her voice is soft. I have known hardship before. God will guide me through it again. But when you look at her hands, you notice the faint tremors she tries to hide. She is not afraid for herself. She is afraid for Mary. That night, as she kneels in her private chapel, her prayer is longer than usual. Her voice trembles only once. You stand beside her in the candlelit quiet, the shadows trembling as if listening. This is exile in all but name. But Catherine of Aragon does not break. She endures. She waits. She prays. And deep within her, you feel something solidifying. The strength of a woman. The king can remove from court, but never from truth. The winter at Moor settles over everything like a heavy, unyielding quilt. You feel it in the stiff morning air, in the slow-burning fireplaces, in the way Catherine wraps her shawl twice around her shoulders before stepping into the corridor. Life here is quieter, too quiet, and the silence often feels like a second form of exile. One the king never had to write down, yet Catherine moves through it with that same composed grace, as if she's determined to turn every lonely hallway into a corridor of purpose. It starts with her routine. Every dawn, before even the first servant stirs, she kneels to pray. You watch her breath form pale clouds in the cold room, her hands interlaced tightly. Her prayers aren't desperate, they're disciplined, structured. They anchor her. They remind her that even though the world has become painfully small, she is still connected to something infinite. She rises, always slowly, always with intention. She reads devotional texts, most of them worn from years of use. She turns the pages gently, her fingers lingering on familiar passages. She whispers reflections to herself, quiet enough that you catch only fragments, but enough to know she's stitching her faith into every hour of every day. And then she works. Because Catherine does not know how to be idle. She embroiders gifts for her ladies. She arranges charitable dispatches from her own meager funds. She stays informed about European politics through letters. Even though many are delayed or censored. She educates the remaining women in her household, teaching Spanish, scripture, and court etiquette as if preparing them for a future she no longer fully hopes for herself. What most people don't realize, and what history often forgets, is that Catherine kept a kind of monastic discipline in exile. She fasted regularly. She observed strict devotional hours. She took long walks in the gardens even in bitter cold, whispering psalms under her breath. Her faith wasn't ornamental, it was armor. One morning, as she stands by the frosted window gazing at the barren trees, a thought flickers through her expression, soft, brief, but unmistakably painful. You follow her gaze, wonder if she's thinking of Mary. Almost certainly she is. Mary is forbidden from writing, forbidden from visiting, forbidden from hearing her mother's voice. The separation gnaws at Catherine in a way nothing else has. You sense the ache behind every composed breath she takes. She presses a hand to the glass, her fingers trembling against the cold surface. Just for a moment. Then she withdraws her hand and steadies herself again. Her faith is her fortress. But even fortresses can feel unbearably lonely. Despite the isolation, messengers still come, ambassadors, envoys, cautious friends navigating political landmines. They bring news in hushed tones. Henry grows more determined. Anne gains more influence. Europe watches with widening eyes. Catherine listens quietly to each report, offering no outburst, no despair, only thoughtful questions, calm judgment, a graceful nod of thanks. But when the messenger leaves, her shoulders sag, just a little, just enough for you to see the truth she hides from everyone else. And still, she doesn't bend. A lesser-known detail slips into your awareness. Catherine kept a hair shirt beneath her gown during these years. A garment worn for penance and spiritual discipline. Not out of self-punishment, but out of devotion, out of a desire to ground herself in humility, to keep her mind sharp and her heart anchored. It's a detail historians mention rarely. Often cautiously, because it feels so intimate. But you sense it now. A quiet thread woven through her steadfastness. Then comes the letter. A real one. A rare one. Smuggled through sympathetic hands. It's from Mary. You feel Catherine freeze when she sees the handwriting. Her breath catches. Her fingers trembling so violently she almost drops the page. She reads it in silence. Lips parted slightly, eyes widening and then softening. Mary writes of loneliness, of confusion, of missing her mother's voice, of trying to act bravely, of praying for her every night. A tear slips down Catherine's cheek, silent, unhurried. She wipes it away with her sleeve and reads the letter again and again, as if memorizing every stroke of ink. Then she writes a reply, slow, deliberate, pouring her heart into each line. She seals it with trembling hands. It never reaches Mary, but the act of writing it strengthens her. Later that evening, you accompany her to the small chapel at Moor. The candles glow softly. casting halos of warm gold across the stone walls. Catherine kneels, her dress pooling around her like spilled wine. You stand beside her, feeling the stillness settle around you like a blanket. Her voice is steady as she prays, not for rescue, not for vindication, but for endurance, for Mary's protection, for clarity, for God to grant her patience where she has none, strength where she falters, and grace where she is wounded. She asks for nothing for herself. As you leave the chapel, you notice the servants watching her with reverence. They've grown to love her, not because she commands it, but because she radiates a kind of quiet compassion that softens even the hardest days. They bring her extra blankets, warm her chamber discreetly, slip her small tokens of loyalty. She accepts everything with a gratitude that feels almost royal in its sincerity. Historians still debate the extent of Catherine's religious fervor, whether she clung to faith out of desperation or discipline. But you understand now, it's neither. Her faith is not a shield from her suffering. It is the compass by which she navigates it. One night, as rain beats against the windows and the manor sinks into shadow, Catherine sits at her writing desk, a single candle illuminating her profile. She looks older now, not broken, but refined by hardship in the way metal is refined by fire. She dips her quill, hesitates, then writes in slow, careful script. God sees. God knows. And truth will endure. She folds the parchment, but she doesn't seal it. Perhaps it's a letter for no one. Or for everyone. Or for herself. She extinguishes the candle and sits for a moment in the darkness, letting the silence wrap around her like a cloak. And then she whispers something you almost miss. I am not alone. For the first time in a long while. You believe it. Because Catherine's faith, quiet, unwavering, luminous, is no longer just a refuge. It is her fortress, her identity, her strength, and it will be the force that carries her through the storm still gathering on the horizon. The days at Moor feel suspended, like time itself is holding its breath around Catherine. Yet even in this imposed stillness, her mind remains restless, alert, searching, reaching for her daughter across the invisible chasm Henry has placed between them. You walk with her through the creaking wooden halls, past windows streaked with winter rain, and each step carries the same quiet ache. Mary is out there somewhere. Alone. So Catherine writes. Not once. Not twice. But constantly. She writes letters to Mary with slow, deliberate care, choosing each word like a prayer. She uses Spanish when she wants to be tender, English when she wants to be steadfast, Latin when she wants to talk about faith or duty. You watch her write by candlelight until her fingers cramp. She warms her hands over the flame, flexes them, and continues. She pours out stories, advice, comfort, her way of mothering across a void. She tells Mary to stay brave, to obey God before men, to trust her conscience, to remember her heritage, and above all, to remember she is loved. Catherine seals each letter with hope. You feel it, the tiny flare of belief that maybe this one will get through. But the letters never reach Mary. Henry's council intercepts them. Some are burned, some are locked away, some are quietly handed to Anne's relatives, who read them with a mixture of pity and strategy. Catherine doesn't know which letters make it through the palace doors, which vanish into the abyss. She only knows that Mary's replies never come. Yet she keeps writing. Because a mother's hope is its own kind of rebellion. One afternoon, you find her sitting near the small east-facing window in her chamber. Her shawl is wrapped tight around her, and the light spills across her face in a soft, pale wash. She's reading one of her own letters, the copy she makes before sending it off. Her lips move silently as she recites the words, as though trying to speak to Mary through sheer force of will. Then a servant approaches, bowing deeply. A parcel has arrived. Catherine unfolds the cloth wrapping to reveal small tokens, a rosary, a ribbon Mary once wore, a prayer card. These are Mary's things, returned not with love, but with the cold practicality of a king who wants to sever ties cleanly. You see Catherine's expression tighten for the briefest instant. She runs her fingers over the ribbon, and her breath catches in her throat. She does not cry. She does not break. But her voice is barely above a whisper when she says, "She is thinking of me." You feel it too. The phantom echo of a message hidden within the return of these objects. Mary may not be allowed to write, but she remembers, she hopes, she resists in her own quiet way. Catherine tucks the tokens into a wooden box lined with folded handkerchiefs. A small shrine to maternal love. Later that evening, as rain drips steadily from the roof, Catherine is summoned by the king's envoys. You accompany her through a dim corridor to the receiving room. Her ladies keep close, fearful, but Catherine walks with a calm that seems carved from stone. The envoys deliver Henry's message with stiff politeness. Catherine must move again. The court finds her influence unhelpful. Her supporters are causing unrest. The king believes it would be better for all parties if she retreats farther from the center of affairs. In other words, deeper isolation. Catherine listens without blinking. When they finish, she answers with quiet firmness. "I will go where the king commands. But I will not say I am not his wife." The envoys shift uncomfortably. They expected tears, or anger, or pleas. They get none, only truth. Another move. Another exile. Another layer of distance between her and her daughter. As she prepares to leave more, you watch her pack her belongings with meticulous care. Not much has accumulated here. Exile does not encourage collections, but she folds her few gowns, wraps the rosary Mary once held, organizes her devotional manuscripts. Her ladies move silently, trying not to let their sorrow show. The atmosphere feels heavy enough to crush bone. Before departure, Catherine walks the grounds one last time. She traces the garden paths where she once whispered psalms. She pauses by a stone bench where she had read letters from Spain. She stops beneath an ancient oak, touching its rough bark as if anchoring herself to something still alive. Still strong. "I am not defeated," she says softly. The wind seems to nod in agreement. The journey to her next residence, Bishop's Hatfield or Buckden or the next in the chain, is long and cold. The carriage rattles over muddy roads, the wheels groaning under winter frost. Catherine clutches her cloak tighter and stares out the window, her gaze fixed on a horizon she cannot reach. In her lap rests another letter to Mary. You watch her reread it, then fold it carefully. Her eyes are tired, red from strain, but the determination in them burns bright. Historians often describe this period as Catherine's fall from favor. But standing beside her now, you see it for what it truly is: the forging of her spirit. The stripping away of everything but her faith and her identity. And then, one night, while you sit with her as she writes yet another letter to Mary, you hear a soft knock on the door. A young servant enters timidly, glancing around as if afraid of being overheard. He hands Catherine a small folded note. No seal. No mark. No signature. She opens it, and her breath catches. A message from Mary. Short, frantic, smuggled through dangerous channels. I am loyal to you. I am your daughter. I will always be. Catherine closes her eyes, pressing the paper to her lips. Just once, just for that heartbeat, she lets her tears fall freely. Then she folds the note and tucks it carefully into her bodice. Over her heart where no decree, no counsel, no king can reach it, she whispers, God has heard my prayer. And in that small room of exile, surrounded by darkness and damp, something luminous fills the space. Catherine's love endures. Her resolve intensifies. Her hope rekindles. And you feel it, deep and certain, as she lifts her chin and begins writing again. This woman will not break. The move to her new residence, this time to Buckden Tower, feels different from the others. Not colder, not harsher, but heavier, as if the very air understands that Catherine is being pushed farther from the world she once commanded. You feel it the moment the carriage wheels cross through the iron gates, a sense of tightening, of narrowing, of a future closing in around her like a corridor with too many locked doors. Buckden is formidable in its way. Tall red brick walls. A moat that reflects the gray sky like a sheet of dull metal. Rooms that echo even when Catherine whispers. It's not a prison, not officially, but there's a stillness here that feels like waiting. And Catherine has been waiting too long. Her new household is smaller, carefully chosen by the king, loyal to him, not to her, eyes that watch more than serve, ears that listen for any sign of resistance. Catherine notices immediately, but she does not let it show. She greets each servant with dignity, thanks them for their duties, and requests nothing more than a fire, a writing desk, and space enough to pray. She makes the place her own as best she can, placing Mary's ribbon on her bedside table, arranging her manuscripts along the wall, lighting candles to soften the gloom, but the weight of supervision hangs everywhere, like a net cast over her life. And in the midst of this suffocating quiet, Anne Boleyn's shadow grows longer. You hear her name more frequently now, carried on the lips of messengers, tucked between lines of diplomatic letters, whispered by Catherine's ladies when they think she isn't listening. Anne is no longer merely a court favorite. She is a political force, a presence, a rising sun whose beams are burning away the last of Catherine's former life. Ambassadors write that Anne now speaks for the king on matters of state, that she dictates who may see him, that she is addressed with titles not yet given but already assumed. Catherine receives these reports in calm silence. She folds each letter with steady fingers and places it among her papers. Her expression remains serene, but you feel the small, invisible fractures forming beneath that calm surface, hairline cracks in a heart stretched too thin. One morning, as snow melts sluggishly along the courtyard walls. Catherine receives an unexpected visitor, Eustace Chapais, the Spanish ambassador, one of her few true allies left. He bows deeply, with reverence that carries 1,000 unspoken truths. Their conversation is quiet but urgent. Chapais informs her that Anne's family, the Boleyns, now wield influence over appointments, finances, even church positions, that Henry speaks openly of marrying Anne, that plans are already in motion for a break with Rome. Catherine breathes in slowly, holds it, releases it. God's will, she murmurs, is not changed by ambition. Chapais insists Spain will support her, that Rome supports her, that the people of England revere her. Catherine listens, but her eyes remain fixed on the window, where sleet taps against the glass in thin, desperate strokes. When Chapais leaves, you walk with her to the small chapel. She kneels, pressing her hands together so firmly her knuckles blanch. She prays not for victory, but for clarity. Show me what to do, she whispers. Show me how to endure. Her voice trembles just once. Only once. Days pass, and Anne's influence grows bolder. Songs circulate praising her beauty. Courtiers wear her colors at feasts. Some servants at Buckden begin referring to her, quietly, as the king's future wife. Catherine hears all of it, does not flinch, does not bend, but she grows quieter. One evening, as the sky dims to purple, Catherine reads letters sent by those loyal to her cause. You notice her pause at one line. Her brow tightens. She rereads it, slower this time. It says, Anne has demanded Mary be declared illegitimate. Catherine closes her eyes. Her breath catches. A pain deeper than any exile suffuses her expression, sharp, immediate, visceral, not for herself, never for herself, for Mary. When she opens her eyes again, something new glimmers there. Not fear, not sorrow. Something harder. Resolve that feels sharper than steel. She writes a letter to Henry. In it, she calls him her husband, her king, the father of her daughter. She speaks with tenderness, but with unwavering firmness. She reminds him of their years together, of their vows before God, of the foundation upon which their kingdom stands. And she begs only one thing. Do not harm our child. The letter is sent. No reply comes. A few days later, news reaches Buckden. Anne intercepted it, burned it, and told Henry Catherine was attempting to manipulate him. Catherine hears this and sits perfectly still for several minutes. Her ladies watch anxiously, unsure what to do, but Catherine does not weep. She simply whispers, God sees. And that is enough for her to continue. A lesser-known fact drifts into your awareness during these months. Catherine fasted more strictly than ever, not out of despair but out of spiritual defiance. She believed that if her body weakened, her spirit would sharpen. Some days she ate only bread and broth. Some days nothing at all until dusk. Her ladies begged her to stop. Physicians warned her. Catherine answered, My strength comes from God. But you, standing beside her now, sense the toll it takes. Her footsteps are slower. Her hands tremble more often. Her face grows paler, more hollow, yet her eyes carry a steady, piercing certainty that frightens even the emissaries who come to see her. One night, during a storm that rattles the windows and makes the tower stones groan, a messenger arrives with Henry's newest decree. Catherine is forbidden from calling herself queen. Her household must address her as Princess Dowager. She may not see Mary. She may not write to Mary. And any servant who defies this order will be removed. Catherine reads the decree in silence. Her ladies wait for her to break. But instead, she rises, walks to her desk, takes a fresh sheet of parchment, and writes, "I am queen. God married me. No man can unmarry me." She seals the note with the wax from her dwindling candle. Not for Henry. Not for Rome. Not even for Mary. For herself. For the truth. As she extinguishes the candle, the room sinks into darkness. But Catherine stands tall in that darkness, unafraid, unbroken, utterly certain of who she is. And as the wind batters the walls of Buckden Tower, you feel it deep in your bones. Anne may control the court. Henry may control the law. But Catherine controls her soul. Buckden Tower grows smaller behind you as Catherine's carriage rattles along the muddy road. But you don't feel any sense of freedom in the movement. If anything, the world seems to shrink with every passing mile. Catherine's latest relocation feels more severe than the last, more purposeful, more isolating, like the final tightening of a net. When the carriage turns toward Kimbolton Castle, you sense immediately what Henry intends: not comfort, not dignity, but confinement that can be framed as care. Kimbolton is remote, quiet, surrounded by flat, bleak fields that swallow sound and warmth. The castle itself is drafty, with corridors that seem always half-lit, staircases that groan underfoot, and windows so narrow they feel more like slits in a fortress than openings to the world. Catherine is led to a suite of rooms on the upper floor, spacious but cold. Beautifully paneled but unmistakably isolating. It's clear these rooms have been chosen not for her comfort, but for how easily they can be monitored. A new staff awaits her. Hand-picked. Loyal to Henry. Polite, but distant. Attentive, but watchful. They call her Princess Dowager. Catherine corrects them gently every time. "I am the king's true wife," she says softly, "and your queen." Some bow and whisper apologies. Most do not. She does not bend. But she grows quieter. You notice it in small things. The way she pauses a moment longer before rising from her bed. The way her breath turns to faint vapor even inside her chambers. The way she reaches for the wall when walking, as though grounding herself. Her prayers remain constant, but her voice grows softer, more fragile, as though her strength has shifted from her body into her spirit entirely. Even so, she keeps working. She writes letters to Rome, to Spain, to anyone who will hear her truth. She petitions to see Mary. She argues the case of her marriage with flawless logic, unwavering faith. She advises her few remaining loyalists with the wisdom of someone who has endured every cruelty with grace. But the world around her is changing faster than she can reach it. Henry is openly courting Anne now. More than courting, he's reorganizing the very foundations of the kingdom to marry her. He has dismissed entire councils, defied Rome, embraced advisors who fuel his ambition. He has begun calling himself supreme head of the Church of England, at least as far as the law of Christ allows. A phrase that grows shorter every time he repeats it. And Anne? Anne has all but taken the Queen's place. She presides over court gatherings with confident authority. She receives admirers. She influences appointments. She dresses in royal colors. And soon, she will be something Catherine was never allowed to be. Queen in name, not just in spirit. News of Anne's pregnancy arrives like a winter gale, sharp and merciless. Catherine receives the news in silence. Her ladies gasp. Some cry. One curses under her breath. Catherine simply folds her hands. She bows her head. And she whispers, "Mary must be protected." But you see it, the tiny shiver in her spine, the faint wobble in her breath. This changes everything. Henry will move faster now. Anne will push harder. The world will turn its gaze away from the wronged queen and toward the rising one. In the weeks that follow, Catherine's isolation deepens. Word reaches her that Anne has convinced Henry to cut her household again. Several longtime ladies-in-waiting, women who have served Catherine for decades, are removed without warning. When they come to say goodbye, Catherine embraces each one gently, offering comfort instead of seeking it. "You have served me faithfully," she tells them, "and God sees faithfulness." Then the doors close behind them, and you feel the air grow colder. A strange, lesser-known detail emerges during these months. Catherine, ever devout, begins keeping her own hours more strictly than ever. She wakes before dawn to pray. She fasts 3 times a week. She spends long hours reading aloud from Scripture to her remaining attendants. Her voice soft but steady. These rituals become lifelines, not habits of despair, but acts of resistance. One night, as a bitter wind curls around the castle towers, a letter arrives. From Henry. Not affectionate. Not apologetic. Not even cruel. Just cold. An order. Catherine must choose new servants from a list he provides. She must cease calling herself queen. She must stop corresponding with foreign powers. She must accept her position, for her own comfort and well-being. Catherine reads the letter without blinking. Then she rises, walks to her writing desk, and writes her reply with steady, deliberate strokes. "I will not choose servants who do not love me. I will not say I am not your wife. And I will not call myself by a title I never held. I am queen." She seals the letter, hands it to the messenger. And when the door closes, she sits very still. Not broken, not defeated, but weighed down by a sorrow so deep you feel it radiate through the quiet room. Her health begins to waver. Some mornings she cannot rise without assistance. Her appetite fades. Her color drains. Her hands tremble when she lifts her rosary. But her spirit, astonishingly, strengthens. One evening, as you watch her struggle to her feet, she rests a hand on your arm, steadying herself. Her voice is weak but resolute. "I will die calling myself queen," she says. "And I will not lie to save my comfort." She turns toward the window, looking out at the moonlit fields, lonely, quiet, endless. "And Mary," she whispers, "will know I stood firm. She places her hand over her heart, over the folded note Mary once smuggled to her, and closes her eyes. Historians still debate the cause of her declining health. Some say worry. Some say heartbreak. Some say the extreme fasting. Others whisper darker possibilities, an illness. Or worse, an intentional neglect by those who found her inconvenient. But as you stand beside her now, you understand the truth that cannot fit neatly into any single explanation. Catherine is not dying from sickness. She is dying from separation, from grief, from a life stripped of everything but faith. Yet she remains unbroken. And as the cold wind rustles the castle's ancient stones, you feel it. The world may call her Princess Dowager. The king may call her obstinate. Anne may call her irrelevant. But Catherine of Aragon, isolated, ailing, exiled, is still, and always will be, a queen. The winter at Kimbolton settles into Catherine's bones long before it settles into the landscape. You feel it in the stiffness of her movements, the slowness in her breath when she rises from bed, the way she presses her hand to her chest after climbing even a few steps. Yet every morning, without fail, she kneels to pray, and every morning, you see the same unwavering determination in her eyes, the kind that refuses to surrender to pain, to isolation, or to the cold corridors echoing with her loneliness. Her health is failing. There's no pretending otherwise. But Catherine hides her weakness with practiced grace. She walks slowly, yes, but she walks. She tires quickly, but she listens. She counsels. She comforts. Her remaining ladies move around her like anxious shadows, adjusting pillows, warming blankets, checking the fire. Catherine thanks them gently each time. Gratitude soft but luminous. Still, rumors seep into the castle walls like damp. Some say she is dying of heartbreak. Others whisper that Anne's allies are starving her of resources. And a darker rumor, one that drifts from servant to servant in trembling tones, suggests poison. Historians still debate this grim possibility. Some believe her symptoms were consistent with cancer. Others argue for cardiac failure. And some point to political enemies who had every reason to hasten her decline. The truth is murky, tangled in centuries of speculation. But standing beside Catherine now, you see something that transcends medical theories. She is not dying simply because her body is failing. She is dying because a lifetime of endurance has finally worn her down. Yet even in this slow unraveling, she remains astonishingly composed. One cold morning, as frost paints the window panes in pale white lattices, Catherine insists on sitting at her writing desk. Her lady tries to protest, but Catherine raises a gentle hand. "I must write to my daughter," she says. Her voice is frail, but her resolve is sharp. She dips her quill and writes carefully. Slowly, each stroke seems to cost her breath. She writes about faith, about virtue, about courage. She reminds Mary that she is legitimate, loved, and destined for greatness. She urges her not to be weary in spirit, to remain obedient but firm, to trust in God above all earthly power. And then she writes a line that makes her hand tremble. "Do not grieve for me, my child, we shall meet again in God's time." She seals the letter. You know it will never reach Mary. But Catherine writes it anyway. Because hope, even fragile hope, is still an act of love. Her days become a pattern of struggle and stillness. Some mornings, she cannot eat. Some afternoons, she sleeps sitting upright because lying down makes her chest hurt. Some nights, she wakes gasping, hands clutching at her gown until her ladies rush to steady her. Yet every time she regains her breath, she whispers a prayer of thanks. One afternoon, a rare moment of sunlight spills across her chamber. Catherine asks to be taken to the small oratory at the end of the hall. It takes nearly 10 minutes to get her there, her legs weak. Her breath shallow, but she kneels before the altar with astonishing dignity. You can see her shoulders trembling, but her voice remains steady as she prays. She thanks God for her life, for her daughter, for every trial that strengthened her faith, for every sorrow that taught her compassion, and even for Henry. Forgive him, she murmurs, for he knows not what he does. You feel something tighten in your chest, not pity, not admiration, but something deeper, awe. True forgiveness is rare. Catherine offers it freely. Later that evening, a messenger arrives from court, one who looks too nervous to meet her gaze. He brings news that Henry and Anne have been crowned, that Anne grows larger with child by the day, that Mary has been forced to serve the infant Princess Elizabeth as a subordinate, that the king forbids Mary from using her own title. For the first time in months, you see Catherine's composure falter. She serves her sister? Catherine whispers, pressing her fingers to her lips. The messenger nods. Catherine closes her eyes, not in defeat, in prayer. When she opens them again, a tear rolls down her cheek, not for herself, but for the girl she cannot protect. That night, she grows worse. Her cough deepens. Her breathing shortens. Her skin chills despite the fire. Her ladies cluster around her, frightened but gentle. The physician is called, though his remedies do little. He mutters about her heart, her stomach, her lungs, uncertain, overwhelmed. Catherine listens patiently to his theories, nodding politely, then returns her focus to the crucifix beside her bed. They mean well, she whispers, but only God knows the hour. The following days are a blur of fading strength. Catherine writes fewer letters, she walks less, she sleeps more, her breaths shallow and labored. Yet even in this frailty, she maintains a quiet dignity that fills the room like incense. One evening, as snow begins to fall outside, she speaks to her ladies with surprising clarity. Remember, truth does not die with me. You feel the shift, the air tightening, the light dimming. Catherine senses her time drawing near. In the stillness of night, when the castle is quiet enough that you hear the faint wind scraping against the shutters, she asks to confess and receive the sacraments. Her voice is soft, reverent. She confesses not bitterness, not resentment, not anger, but moments when she doubted her own strength. As dawn breaks, pale and cold, she grows weaker still. Her ladies gather at her bedside. Her breath becomes faint. Her eyes drift closed. And then, unexpectedly, she asks for parchment one last time. With trembling hands, she dictates a final letter. A letter to Henry. Not angry. Not accusing. Not bitter. Tender. Gracious. Almost impossibly forgiving. She calls him beloved, calls herself faithful, prays for him, prays for Anne, prays for Mary, and ends with words so gentle they feel like a blessing. I commend your soul to God, for I have always been your true wife. Some historians still debate whether the kindness in that letter was genuine, strategic, or symbolic, but standing beside her now, you understand the truth. It was love. Not romantic love, not blind love, but the love born from decades of shared history, trials, and faith. That night, her breathing slows, each breath shallower than the last. Her rosary slips from her fingers. Her ladies kneel, praying softly. The candle beside her flickers. Catherine opens her eyes one last time, just long enough to whisper, "Into thy hands, O Lord." And then, softly, so softly you barely notice at first, her body grows still. The queen no more, yet more a queen than ever. The dawn after Catherine's passing breaks strangely softly over Kimbolton, as if the sky itself knows it should tread gently. The castle is quieter than usual, not the ordinary, muted quiet of exile, but a deep, reverent stillness that seems to press into the very stones. You stand beside her bed for a long moment, looking at the peaceful expression on her face. The lines of worry that had carved themselves into her features over years of trial have softened. Her hands, folded carefully over her chest, no longer tremble. The tension that held her body upright even in suffering has dissolved. She looks, finally, impossibly, at rest. Her ladies kneel around her, faces blotched with tears, hands clasped in prayer. Some sob openly, others sit with stunned silence, whispering Ave Marias through broken breaths. One young maid hides her face in her apron, shoulders shaking. Another strokes Catherine's hair gently, as if hoping the tender gesture might still wake her. You feel something stir in your chest, grief. Yes, but also a strange mixture of awe and relief. Catherine has not lost. She has not surrendered. She has simply laid her burdens down. Word of her death spreads quickly, carried by trembling servants and hurried messengers. By midday, Kimbolton is swarmed with activity, clergy arriving to offer rites, officials arriving to take inventory, couriers rushing toward court with sealed reports. But none of them enter Catherine's chamber without bowing their heads first. Even those who never supported her, who bowed to Anne's faction, who followed Henry's decrees, feel the weight of what has been lost. A great lady has died. A queen in everything but title. A woman who endured storms that would have broken armies. You follow her ladies as they prepare her body. They move with slow reverence, washing her face with warm water, combing her hair, wrapping her gently in linen. They dress her in her finest gown, deep black velvet trimmed with gold embroidery. A gown she had kept for feast days and holy days. Someone places her wedding ring on her finger. Someone else lays her rosary between her hands. The air smells faintly of beeswax and rosewater. Then the door opens, hesitantly, and the Spanish ambassador, Chapais, enters. He stops abruptly at the sight of her, one hand clutching the doorframe as if needing support. His face crumples with grief. God has taken the queen, he whispers. The ladies nod but say nothing. Chapais kneels beside her bed, pressing Catherine's cold hand to his forehead. His lips move silently in prayer, tears dripping onto her sleeve. He had been one of her few true allies, fierce, loyal, steadfast, and now he weeps like a son. He stands slowly and turns to her ladies. "You must know," he murmurs, "all Europe will mourn her." And he is right. But word must first reach the man who changed the course of her life. Henry. The message is sent immediately, carried by a rider who gallops through sleet and mud to reach the court. You imagine him dismounting, breathless, pushing through bustling corridors now decorated in Anne's colors. You imagine the moment Henry receives the letter, the moment he breaks the seal. Historians still debate his reaction. Some say he went silent, staring into the distance. Some claim he whispered a prayer. Others insist he showed no sorrow at all. There is even a rumor that he and Anne wore yellow that day, Spain's color of mourning, or England's color of celebration, depending on which version you believe. The truth is tangled in gossip, bias, and time. But one thing is certain: Henry did not come to see her. He did not allow Mary to visit the body. He did not offer any public lamentation. And that silence, colder than any decree he ever issued, echoes across the country. Yet despite the king's distance, many feel Catherine's passing like a national grief. Villagers light candles in church windows. Women whisper prayers for her soul. Priests mention her in sermons. Even some nobles, quietly, secretly, mourn a queen who embodied dignity in the face of humiliation. Meanwhile, preparations for her funeral begin. She will be buried as the Princess Dowager of Wales, not as Queen, Henry's order, of course. Her coffin will be plain oak, not the royal gilded canopy she deserves. Her procession will be modest, not the sweeping grandeur that once followed her. Yet you notice something. Her ladies do not remove the Q embroidered onto her funeral pall. Even in death, they refuse to deny her truth. Before the procession, Chapais returns one last time. He places a small folded note in Catherine's coffin, its contents known only to him. He kisses her forehead and whispers something in Spanish, something so tender it makes your throat ache. Then he steps back, wiping his eyes. At dawn, the bells toll. The sound is solemn, low, resonant, rolling across the frost-covered fields like a farewell embrace. Catherine's coffin is carried through the castle halls by men who walk slowly. Reverently, her ladies follow behind, some supporting each other, others clutching rosaries so tightly the beads leave marks on their palms. Outside, the sky is gray, thick with winter clouds. The procession moves through the courtyard, boots crunching in the icy mud. A few villagers gather near the gates. Heads bowed, one woman crosses herself. A little boy tugs his mother's sleeve, asking who the lady in the box was. Una gran reina, she whispers. A great queen. The procession travels for miles to reach Peterborough Abbey, where she will be laid to rest. The journey is long and cold, but Catherine's ladies remain at her side. Inside the abbey, lit by flickering candles and shadowed vaults, a quiet funeral mass is held. No royal anthem, no trumpets, no official mourners from court. But the abbey is filled. Rich and poor, English and Spanish, servants and clergy, People who had heard of her kindness, her piety, her dignity. They come not because they were commanded, but because they loved her. The bishop speaks of her devotion, her faith, her resilience. He calls her noble. He calls her steadfast. He calls her beloved of God. He does not call her queen, he dares not, but everyone in the room hears the word anyway. As the coffin is lowered into the earth, one of her ladies breaks down, dropping to her knees beside the grave, sobbing into her hands. Another whispers, "My lady, my queen," through tears. The abbey bells ring again, slow, mournful, each toll like a heartbeat fading. When the final prayer ends, you stand at the edge of her grave, feeling the cold air brush against your face. Catherine rests beneath the stones now, far from Spain, far from Mary, far from the throne that should have been hers. But she is not gone. Her strength lingers in the whisper of the candles, in the quiet breath of prayer that still echoes in the abbey. You close your eyes. You feel her presence, soft, steady, unbroken, a heart that held, a spirit that endured. And though Henry has tried to remove her from his life, from his court, from his memory, you realize something. Her story is not finished. Not yet. There is one final chapter left. A legacy that refuses to fade. A final message that will echo beyond her grave. And Mary, her daughter, has yet to hear her mother's last words. The path ahead glimmers like a faint light in the distance. You follow it, knowing Catherine's final truth is about to unfold. The days after Catherine's burial feel strangely hollow, as though the world has not yet learned how to move without her. You return from Peterborough Abbey with the echo of tolling bells still lingering in your bones. The quiet at Kimbolton is no longer the oppressive silence of exile. It is the echoing absence of a woman whose presence once filled even the stillest rooms with purpose. You walk through the corridors she once touched, tracing the imprint of her footsteps along stone floors that already feel colder without her warmth. But the world does not pause for grief. News travels fast, faster than loyalty, faster than truth. At court, Henry continues with his duties, cloaked in the stubborn conviction that his choices were justified. Anne, heavy with the certainty of her new status and the life inside her, moves through palace chambers like a rising star determined never to set. And yet, even amid their triumph, you sense the tremor Catherine's passing sends through the kingdom. It begins with letters. Ambassadors from Spain, France, and Rome send urgent correspondence expressing sorrow, disapproval, unease. They speak of Europe mourning a great queen, a woman whose dignity outshone her misery. Some letters are defiant, some diplomatic, some lined with warnings of consequences yet to come. Catherine's death has not ended the storm, it has intensified it. Then there is Mary. You feel the weight of her grief even before the messenger reaches her. She is kept away from her mother's body, forbidden to attend the funeral, denied the right to mourn openly. When the news finally reaches her, Mary collapses into a chair, clutching her stomach, her face pale with devastation. She whispers her mother's name over and over, as if the repetition might bring Catherine back. Her ladies try to comfort her, but Mary weeps with the raw anguish of someone who has lost not only a parent, but the last person who loved her without condition in a world ruled by shifting loyalties and calculated affection. She asks for the last letter her mother wrote. It never reached her. She asks for a lock of Catherine's hair. Denied. She asks to pray for her mother's soul. Even that, the court tries to moderate. But Mary prays anyway. She kneels in her small, lonely chamber, pressing her forehead to her clasped hands, whispering Spanish prayers taught to her in childhood, the same ones Catherine once murmured beside her cradle. Her tears fall onto the stone floor, each one a vow. She will not forget her mother's truth. She will not surrender her own. Across England, whispers grow louder. People speak of Catherine with reverence, calling her La Reina Verdadera, the true queen. They tell stories of her charity, her wisdom, her steadfastness. They light candles in church windows. Even when it displeases the king, Catherine becomes not just a memory, but a quiet rebellion. And you, walking through these shifting tides, begin to understand that Catherine's final chapter is not about her death. It's about her legacy. One afternoon, Chapais seeks out Mary. He brings with him the note he placed in Catherine's coffin, having copied its words before laying the original beside her. The letter is brief, written in trembling script, and he reads it aloud in a voice thick with emotion. She loved you more than her own life. She trusted you to remember what is true. And she believed your strength would outshine her suffering. Mary presses her hands to her mouth, sobbing anew, but even through her grief, you sense something steadying inside her, a new spine forged from Catherine's courage. Mary rises from her mourning with her mother's resilience shining through her trembling frame. She stands straighter. She speaks firmer. She refuses the title, Lady Mary, even when threatened, insisting she is the king's legitimate daughter. She resists the pressure to bend her identity to Anne's ambitions. And though she is still a young woman lost in a dangerous court, you see Catherine in her quiet strength, unwavering faith, and a dignity that can withstand storms. Henry hears of Mary's resistance and grows furious. Anne hears of it and grows anxious. But Mary does not bow. Not now. Not ever. Catherine's last gift to her daughter was not a letter the world prevented from being delivered. It was courage. And Mary carries it like a shield. Meanwhile, Catherine herself begins to transform from queen to symbol. Her grave at Peterborough Abbey becomes a quiet pilgrimage site. Villagers leave flowers. Priests whisper prayers. Spanish travelers bow their heads as they pass. Her legacy grows, not through proclamations or monuments, but through stories told at hearthsides and whispered in chapels. She was just. She was brave. She was our true queen. Even some of Henry's own servants mutter that the king had lost the better woman. In time, the kingdom moves forward, but not smoothly. Anne's child, Elizabeth, is born healthy. But Henry grows restless. Anne grows anxious. Their marriage, built on ambition and flame, begins to crack under the pressure of expectation. The court that once celebrated Anne with bright colors and hopeful songs now grumbles behind closed doors. And all the while, Mary watches from a distance, remembering her mother's warning. Stand firm in truth. And you feel it, slowly, like dawn stretching across a dark horizon. Catherine's story does not end in exile or sorrow. It continues in Mary's determination, in the people's affection, in the quiet courage she stitched into the fabric of English memory. One day, years from now, Mary will rise. She will reclaim her title. She will rule in her own right. She will honor her mother's name. But that is a future Catherine never lived to see. Back here at Kimbolton, the last echoes of her life settle into peaceful stillness. You return to the small chapel where she once prayed with trembling hands. The candles flicker gently, casting their soft glow across the worn stone floor. You imagine her kneeling here, whispering her last devotions, asking for strength, offering forgiveness no one deserved but everyone needed. The wind rustles the faded tapestries. The air hums with the memory of her voice. And you close your eyes, imagining her presence still lingers, warm, steady, serene. Then you step out into the cold evening, the sky fading toward twilight. The world feels softer now, quieter, as if it holds its breath in reverence of the woman whose endurance shaped so many lives. Catherine of Aragon did not win in the eyes of men, but in the eyes of history, in the eyes of God, and in the heart of her daughter. She triumphed beyond any crown. Her truth endured. Her spirit endured. Her love endured. And as you walk away from Kimbolton for the last time, the light dimming around you, you whisper the words she lived by. God sees. The sky darkens. Shadows stretch long across the fields. And your footsteps fall soft on the quiet earth. The night wraps gently around you, like a warm cloak. Then, softly, almost like a lullaby, her story settles into silence. End of script. Sweet dreams.